Welcome to the Ghost Stories YouTube channel. Here, we will bring you the scariest experiences through ghost stories, mysteries, and inexplicable mysteries of the mysterious world. Whether you are someone who enjoys learning about ghost stories or simply looking for a new entertainment experience, our channel will be the ideal destination. Join us in the horror space and get ready for the most tense and scary moments. Don't forget to press the subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss any new videos. Thank you for joining the Ghost Stories YouTube channel, and now, get ready for some spooky moments with us.
The Devil. It was pouring rain outside, in a small house deep in a dark alley. The atmosphere was as heavy as lead. Toan just learned the university entrance exam results. The score is not low but still too far from the word pass. Toan's father puffed on a cigarette, his voice grinding. For so many years of investing in education, being the son of a doctor but not being able to pass the medical degree, I'm so humiliated because of you. Toan looked down in shame, not daring to say anything. For many years, living in a traditional, well-educated family, all Toan could do was obey. He is weak and weak. Ty was not originally his wish, but because his father wanted it, he still tried to please him. No way. Toan's father slammed his hand on the table. At any cost, I have to let you study. So that summer, Toan's father sent Toan to Toan to study medical school there. The first time away from home with a guy like Toan who has been sheltered since childhood will be a bit difficult. Toan lives with his cousin. The family has a total of 5 people living in a small house next to the T-hill. Toan shares a room with Ben, his distant cousin, while Bong sleeps with her parents. Studying at a new school is very difficult. After a hard day of studying at school, there is a pile of homework waiting for Toan to handle. That's why he neglected his housework, and his aunt showed her displeasure. One day, after a meal, Toan knew what he meant, so he quickly washed the dishes and went into his room. Feeling frustrated, seeing his younger brother invite him out to enjoy the cool air, Toan quickly nodded in agreement. Behind the small house is a T-hill. I don't know who owns it. Night fell, the gentle wind made the trees stir. The 2 brothers walked under the moonlight. Ben quickly stole some tea leaves to make a drink. In the sound of the wind, Toan heard the faint sound of a flute somewhere far away. Suddenly I heard a voice calling, "Toan, oh." Toan was startled and looked around. The road was deserted with no one in sight. Toan asked Ben, "Did you hear anything?" The boy shook his head and continued walking. There was another voice, "Here, here, here." It was cold all the way down my spine. Looking up at the top of the hill, Toan suddenly saw a dark shadow standing still, looking down, its shoulders rising in an inexplicable way. The stranger suddenly shook his head, tilted his neck to the left, then tilted his neck to the right. Toan grabbed Ben's shirt, wagging him to look up. Looking again, the figure had disappeared. Toan was sweating profusely, urging the boy to come home quickly. When Toan returned home, he didn't dare tell anyone. That night, he put his hand on Toan's forehead and thought, how long had Ben been sleeping? Toan saw something very strange. It seemed like that person's shoulders were higher than usual. It felt like that person turned his neck back from front to back. Shivering, Toan tried to close his eyes and sleep. On the full moon night of Mid-Autumn Festival, the village streets are bustling. Children ran back and forth, going to the cultural house to ask for candy. Toan was at home studying, looking out the window opposite the bed to see baby Bong lounging in the garden. Toan called and asked, "Aren't you going out, Bong?" The 6-year-old girl looked up and ran back, holding her hand on the iron frame, and replied, "I have more fun playing at home. This uncle gives me a lot of candy." Toan is worried. There are a lot of kidnappings these days. How many cases are there? Toan looked out into the garden to see who was wandering next to her. But I didn't see anyone. The two uncles are both away. Today everyone has to participate in the Mid-Autumn Festival celebration for the children in the village. Adults gathered to drink tea and chat, children paraded around. Toan stayed at home and took on the task of looking after baby Bong. Toan quickly urged Bong to go into the house. The girl was stubborn. I won't go in, it's more fun out here, pay attention and give me lots of moon cakes, will you eat them? The little girl innocently put her hand through the iron frame and opened her fist. Toan saw that the inside was full of dirt. The little girl smiled, her teeth sticking to the dirt. Toan was startled and shouted, Bong! Why are you eating dirt like that? The little girl rolled her eyes and said, I'll eat that cake for you. After saying that, she pointed towards the tea hill. Thinking about what happened last time, Toan's spine felt cold again. He ran straight to the garden and picked up Bong. The baby struggled and cried loudly. Toan washed the girl, then closed the window overlooking the tea hills and sat down to wait for everyone to return. When she got home, her aunt saw her dirty, crying, and blamed Toan. No one knows the strange incident that just happened today. Living with his uncle and cousin was not comfortable, so Toan had to ask his parents to let him stay. Parents also agree. Toan said goodbye to the small room overlooking the tea hills, wishing to never have to return to sleep another night here again. However, Toan did not know that the following days would bring even more terrible things. Pap, pat, each drop of rain began to fall on Toan's face. Toan is busy moving things from his old room out. What a misery! There's more rain. Toan has lived in this room for half a year. The walls are green and yellow, the Wi-Fi is intermittent. Just a few days ago, Toan and everyone in the neighborhood received a notice to move. All were shocked. Renting a house without a contract, so now there is no point in suing. The landlady's voice was high-pitched, let's all move out in the next 2 days. Don't say much. That night, Toan wandered around Taiwan City looking for a new room, feeling anxious. If you don't find it quickly, who will save it? The once handsome young man is now struggling and turning dark. Going all night, he didn't like any place, the place was too expensive, the place was too dirty. At 10 p.m., he was about to give up and go home when his phone rang. Strange number. Toan clicked to receive the call. A female voice rang out, you're looking for a room, right? I still have a room there, it's okay, you can come over too. Feeling suspicious, Toan turned the car toward the area near Core River. Next, Toan is a woman in her 30s, wearing heavy makeup and welcoming with a smile, come in, it's the last room in the row. The motel rooms are still quite new. Entering the empty room, Toan was surprised, the room was not big but quite clean. There's just enough room for a bed and some miscellaneous furniture. The bathroom is also small. The price is 1 million a month. Living alone is quite cheap. But Toan's parents have no regrets about their son, as long as he succeeds in studying and makes his grandparents proud. Because of time constraints, Toan decided to choose this room. He promised the landlord's sister would come over tomorrow to pay a deposit and then rush home. That night, Toan had difficulty sleeping. Moving after a long period of time is not easy. The next morning, Toan called his friends over to gradually clean the room so he could move in the next day. The weather was still gloomy. Toan called his mother to inform her about the new place to live. Toan's mother was a faithful person. She advised Toan to worship carefully and choose the time to move in. Tomorrow morning, Toan has to get up early to go to his new room to get the day, and then move everything in the day after tomorrow. When Toan woke up in the morning, the sun was shining again, the weather was very erratic. Toan temporarily brought a few books to his new room to store, as if he were moving things. At exactly 7 a.m., Toan stepped out of the house and didn't get to his new room until 7:30 a.m. The road was a bit congested. In contrast to the sultry atmosphere outside, the weather forecast for thunderstorms, the new room was extremely cool. Toan was secretly happy. Summer won't be difficult to live like this. Probably because it was located at the very end of the block, Toan's room was out of the sun and not as hot as the other rooms. It took 2 hours to clean up. The previous person had just moved out. The room wasn't too dirty, but because he was used to it being clean, Toan still cleaned it inside and out a few times to feel secure. In the middle of cleaning, occasionally Toan heard a rustling sound like someone was scratching with their fingernails. Thinking it was some rat or cockroach on the wall, Toan didn't pay much attention. It's no different from Toan's old room. At night, we hear hundreds of noises. If we pay attention to them all, we won't have the strength to study. It was almost noon when all the cleaning was done. Toan went out to find a restaurant, partly to explore the terrain and also to prepare for his future life. After eating, Toan sat down to rest at an iced tea shop near the boarding house. The first time we met, the waitress smiled. "Just came here?" Toan shyly nodded. "I came here from Hanoi to study, now I rent a room here." The waitress replied, "Oh, that's all I can say, but I can't remember." After a few months, there was a new guest. "You must also be the 5th or 6th person to come here since the beginning of the year until now." Before I could drink her a few glasses of water, she quickly left without saying anything. Toan could only laugh it off. At noon, Toan went home and locked the door to clean up the old room. Just as he turned to leave, Toan heard, "Cock cock." There was a knocking sound from the door of the room. Toan turned around to listen, but there was no sound. After taking 2 steps, the strange knock on the door rang out again. The knocking sound is dull and deep, slow and steady. Toan slowly approached the door, intending to look inside through the round hole on the door handle. Bending lower and lower, Toan trembled, as if someone was in there. Toan was about to look through the keyhole when the sound of a motorbike rang out on the other side, startling Toan. A boy drove a car through the gate of the boarding house. Toan looked and quickly greeted. He grinned, "New guy, hello, it's a neighbor, my room is right next door." After that, he parked the car and went straight into the next room. Toan quickly ran out of the dormitory, not having time to think about anything else. The day we moved in, it was pouring rain. Toan rented a small 3-wheeled vehicle to carry all his capital to his new room. Lam from Tai Ben also went with Toan to help Toan arrange, otherwise tonight he would still be in trouble. The wet rain makes people's mood uncomfortable. The car was going when suddenly the driver suddenly braked. Toan stood up to see what was happening. It turned out that in the middle of the road there was a black cat standing in the rain. It looked skinny and had sticky fur. It screamed miserably and stood in front of the wheel, refusing to move. The driver shouted and waved his hand to chase him away, but he didn't leave. Toan got out of the car and calculated when I picked it up again, it ran away, disappearing behind the roadside grass that was fading in the white rain. Unlucky. The driver got angry and continued. Both guys struggled all day. At night, they quickly ate a bowl of noodles and then Lam had to go home. Toan went to the gate to see his friend off, feeling very grateful, Be careful when you return. After that, Toan returned to the room, because he was so tired that he fell asleep without having time to take a shower. Tick tick tick. Toan suddenly opened his eyes and woke up in the middle of the night. When did the lights go out? Don't turn off the lights, right? Toan groped for his glasses, put them on, looked at the clock above his head, 3 a.m. exactly. Weird. Toan got up and turned on the light. Outside, the lightning still sketched streaks of light on the floor of the room. Toan quickly went to take a shower. Since moving to the new boarding house, Toan has felt very tired. His parents called to check on him but didn't bother to pick up the phone. Returning to the motel room, Toan lay down and fell asleep, ignoring everything. Not deep but restful sleep takes up most of Toan's day. At 3 a.m. every night, Toan suddenly opened his eyes in the dark, his body ached. Even if he tried to sleep, he would wake up at 5 a.m. Seeing that he was tired, Toan ran for exercise around the boarding house. One time, Toan talked to his best friend in Hanoi. Toan boasted that he had just rented a cheap and clean room, and immediately took pictures for Na to see. Na, Toan's close friend from high school, suddenly frowned. Look, how familiar is this room to me? It's just my feeling. But I think you should cover up the windows. What room has so many windows? Hearing what Na said, Toan also felt strange. A small motel room, with only 3 windows and 1 ventilation hole. Sometimes when he returns to his room, Toan also feels like he has lost some privacy, feeling like someone is peering in and looking at him from one of those windows. Toan objected, "It's very secretive to cover it, I sleep with the shutters closed at night." Na laughed, "But that's really strange, that ventilation hole over there, it should be facing the open space. Why is it facing the wall like that? Next to Toan's room is another private building. How is the ventilation hole designed to face the wall? I really don't understand whether it can ventilate anything or not." Toan's mood became increasingly heavy. He woke up every morning at 3 a.m. and didn't even bother to talk to anyone in class. Toan told the story to his mother. She said, "Maybe the land is not suitable, my son, you should consider how to move." But Toan has already paid the rent for 3 months, it will take at least another 2 months before he can move out. Lately, Toan has been dreaming a dream. At night, there is a man, wearing a helmet that covers his face, breathing heavily, holding a trowel to sweep Toan's body back and forth, then occasionally patting, like a gesture of a person applying cement. Toan was uncomfortable and in pain but couldn't move. Just like that, the man swept up near Toan's head and brought his face close. "Can't breathe, okay, can't breathe." Then used both hands to squeeze Toan's nose. Toan struggled and then suddenly woke up. It was also 3 o'clock in the morning. Every day was like that, making Toan extremely stressed. According to the story of Toan's neighbor, that afternoon, the whole neighborhood was in complete chaos. Baby Bong, the youngest daughter of Dang Dung's family, suddenly disappeared. Mrs. Dung went from house to house, begging and crying, praying that everyone would find her and help her. Mr. Dang's face became thinner and he rushed to the city police headquarters to report the case. She went out last night and didn't come back. The adults thought she was just hanging out with the neighborhood kids, but she didn't come home until late. I also participated in searching everywhere. There were several gardens around the house, even going to the tea hills at the end of the village, but I still couldn't find anything. It's just that Mrs. Dung seems to be going crazy. Adults forbid children to go out at night. It was only 7 p.m. and the whole neighborhood was quiet. The next evening, I was sitting watching TV, smoking a pipe cigarette after dinner. In the distance, the sound of a kite flute suddenly echoed. "It's night, how can I fly a kite?" I thought to myself. Suddenly, the silent atmosphere was torn apart by a scream, help. With a bang, the gates of all the surrounding houses opened, and people rushed out into the street. The scream came from Dang Dung's family's house. A large crowd gathered outside. Following the screams, everyone and I ran to the back garden of the house and up the tea hill. Mr. Dang and Mrs. Dung are kneeling at the top of the hill. Hidden behind a layer of tea leaves, between two rows of trees, is the body of a child about 6 years old, white and pretty. Her hair is tied tightly to tea trees on both sides. Eyes wide open. Not feeling. The most horrifying thing was, her mouth was filled with dirt. His arms spread out at both sides were also covered in mud. Groups of worms were squirming on her pure white dress. Seeing that scene, the women sat down and vomited. Ms. Dung writhed on the ground in pain. Mr. Dang's face turned purple and he tried to pick her up, but her hair was tightly wrapped around the tea tree, making it difficult to untangle. The scene was so horrifying, I backed away from the crowd and went home, not daring to look another second. I don't know which cruel murderer was so cruel to a child. The strange thing is, when the police searched the scene, no strange signs were discovered. This side of the tea hill was covered with the footprints of the people in the neighborhood, so the investigation was a bit hindered. However, the girl's footprints were discovered going up from the other side of the hill. Other than that, there were no other footprints at all. At the scene, there were no signs of a fight. It was as if she was lying there on her own. The autopsy results also did not specify the cause of death. Police concluded that the girl died suddenly due to wind on the hill. What about the dirt in her mouth? People in the village rumored that a while ago, she also had that habit. Many people had seen her in a dirty state, but they thought they were naughty children so they didn't pay attention. Many people were still mysterious, saying that the girl had died. After completing the investigation, the family prepared to pay for the unfortunate girl's funeral. After just a few days, Mr. Dang's hair was more than half gray. Mrs. Dung stayed in her room and didn't see anyone. Only Ben was bewildered and didn't understand anything. That's right, he's only in 5th grade, so he can only feel sad when his sister doesn't come home. That night, many people in the neighborhood could not sleep. They feel like there is a cruel murderer still lurking around somewhere. The investigators' answers did not satisfy them. Obviously, the case has too many strange points. That night, I dreamed. The gentle wind blew outside, from the direction of the tea hills. The sound of the flute I heard echoed again. The window shutter I had carefully locked before going to sleep suddenly opened gently. The moon's shadow was obscured by a small black shadow. I sat up and was about to close the door when the window suddenly receded, out of my reach. Baby Bong appeared outside the iron door frame. Reaching in, the girl smiled, "Give it to me." Inside the fist was a handful of soil with a bunch of worms. Worms on her head, wriggling on her shoulders. The girl smiled with black teeth. Suddenly her eyes fell down, and tiny worms crawled out of her eye sockets. I screamed in terror. Then a man approached the window frame. I couldn't see his figure clearly, grabbed the girl's head, turned it from front to back, then took her hand and led her away. Bong walked away from the doorframe, stepping forward, but his remaining eyes were still staring at me and his lips were still smiling in an innocent smile. "What's wrong with you?" My wife's voice pulled me back to reality. I woke up, my back wet with sweat. "It's nothing, it's just a nightmare." "That's right, what happened today is so terrible." Well, try to sleep, you have work tomorrow. Without saying anything, I lay still, my eyes closed. The dream is so real. Toan was in class when he received a call from his mother. Toan's mother said, "Bong is gone, Toan must go to his cousin's house immediately." Receiving the bad news, Toan sat stunned, unable to say anything. After all, the girl was extremely cute and innocent, and now she died so suddenly. Toan's grief choked her throat. Toan's mind suddenly remembered the image of her covered in dirt on Mid-Autumn Festival last year, and he couldn't help but shiver. At the end of class, Toan asked the teacher for permission and quickly took the car to his cousin's house. Toan hasn't been back here for half a year, the house is still the same but much quieter. Outside the village, obituaries have been posted and funeral flags have been hung. It was raining lightly, making the atmosphere even more mournful. Toan walked into the main room where baby Bong's coffin was kept, candlelight was flickering, and incense was wafting. It was not yet time to visit, so besides Mr. Dang who was sitting there were only a few relatives and 2 monks from a nearby temple chanting prayers for the deceased. Toan bowed slightly to greet everyone. Uncle Dang signaled Toan to sit down. Auntie was nowhere to be seen, Uncle Ben still had to go to school. There was a funeral at home, and no one had time to look after the boy. At 2 p.m., the visitation began. The music played full of resentment. Many neighbors came to pay their respects. When Uncle Dang went to see, people said that the girl had passed away at an inauspicious time, so the funeral had to be announced quickly. Wherever she died, the funeral would be taken away, so he did not plan to hold it at the funeral home. Toan walked around the coffin and looked at the girl's face one last time. Looking inside the glass window, Toan was surprised. Her face was covered by a white towel, no one could see anything. When it was time for the funeral, the music played even louder. Toan and 3 other young men in the village took on the task of carrying the coffin. Toan put his shoulder next to the coffin and lifted it up together. The coffin was so heavy that Toan's hands shook. Luckily, in high school, Toan spent some time practicing with his friends, so now he's not so bad at tying his cock tightly. The coffin was carried away with great difficulty. How could a child be this heavy? It's not because of cancer or death. The coffin was almost to the door when suddenly Uncle Dung came out of nowhere, his hair loose and jagged. "Give me back my child, give me back." Her eyes rolled back, Ms. Dung rushed towards the coffin, scratching the arm of the person carrying it in front. Too surprised, no one had time to stop Ms. Dung. The coffin was very heavy and due to the impact from outside, the person carrying the coffin staggered and lost his grip. The sudden weight made the 3 people unable to move in time. The coffin fell and overturned. Toan was about to lift it up again when suddenly his eyes met another pair of eyes. Baby Bong's eyes. In the coffin. The veil covering her face fell off, revealing an extremely frightened face. Eyes wide open, looking straight ahead, mouth open as if screaming something. Toan trembled and didn't dare look at it anymore. Toan thought that after death, people would paint the dead person to look the most beautiful, right? The people around held the mother in pain to the point of going crazy so the funeral could continue. Her hair was jagged as if someone had cut it, dirty and covered with tree branches and leaves. Someone whispered, she lay in the tea hill all night and refused to come home. The funeral brought a long line of people. Many curious people from recent provinces also came to watch and express their condolences to the girl's family. The coffin was taken to the crematorium, then brought to the temple so the girl could rest in peace. The coffin was brought down. Toan stayed with Uncle Dang to wait for the girl's ashes. After waiting for 2 hours, Suddenly a funeral home employee ran to find Mr. Dang. The body is not burned. Maybe. Uncle Dang quickly followed that man into the inner area, where the bodies were cremated after the funeral. Uncle Dang walked for an hour before returning, his eyes wet. "She can't bear to leave, dear." The man's voice choked. It wasn't until it was dark that the two of them received the ash jar and brought it home. Tomorrow morning there will be a ceremony to send her to the temple. That night, Toan helped everyone clean up. By late night, when everything was finished, Toan was exhausted. Toan slept at my uncle's house. After putting up the mosquito net, Toan leaned back next to Little Ben and fell asleep without knowing it. The sound of the rain became louder and louder, causing Toan to wake up from his sleep. The clock on the wall struck 3 a.m. again. It must have become a habit. Toan thought tiredly. Toan heard the flute sound again. Bang, the sound of the shutter opposite the bed hitting the iron frame. Suddenly the top of the screen was concave by a heavy object. A silhouette of a child was holding down the curtain. The girl's face was close to Toan's face, her eyes were wide open and so was her mouth. "Hi hi hee hee, do you feel hot? Hee, I'm so hot." As soon as she laughed, she cried again. "Fresh, hoo 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 hi hoo." The voice was extremely strange because the mouth could not be closed. Toan screamed silently. The girl jumped up on the wall and crawled away. The light turned on, Uncle Ben opened and closed his eyes, not understanding what was happening. Uncle Dang stood at the door, frowned and asked, "What's wrong with you?" Toan shyly shook his head. "No one believes me." Probably too tired and dizzy, Toan is haunted by the scene this morning. He walked through the living room to the bathroom without knowing that the ash urn was on top. The altar is located in a different position from the original. The next morning, Toan and his distant relatives and Uncle Dang brought the girl's ashes to the temple. Uncle Dang hugged the ash jar tightly and walked ahead, everyone followed. Arriving in front of the temple gate, a strong wind blew up. Uncle Dang walked more quickly. As soon as he approached the temple gate, he suddenly staggered. "Probably because I didn't sleep all night." Everyone ran to help but couldn't make it in time. The urn fell to the ground and broke. The wind became even stronger, blowing sand and dust mixed with the sand. Mr. Dang cried, clawing at the ground, hoping to hold back something of his little daughter. The abbot came out to see that scene and could only exclaim, "If you can't enter Buddha's door, there must only be demons. She has no fate with Buddha today. I want to go home and solve the problem. If I wait any longer, I'm afraid it will be. Namo Amitabha Buddha." That evening, Toan's parents immediately took a bus from Hanoi to Tai Nguyen to visit Toan's uncle. As soon as she walked to the door of the house, tears fell from Toan's mother's eyes when she saw the picture of the little girl. Adults sat in the living room, discussing something. Toan was not allowed to participate. After the abbot's strange words this morning, Uncle Dang was completely at a loss. But Toan didn't have the heart to worry anymore. A son's duty is a duty. Toan has done all his responsibilities. The only thing that Toan was worried about was whether he should tell Mr. Dang what he had seen. Toan asked permission to go back to his room to rest so he could go to school tomorrow morning, mostly because he was scared of last night's scene and didn't dare to sleep again. Driving the car to the gate, Toan suddenly looked back at the house. Outside in the garden, there was a dark shadow with long hair standing stunned. Turns out it was my aunt. Uncle Dung slowly turned to face Toan. His face was haggard and scared, his eyes were deeply sunken. Toan was startled and then drove straight. The pain of losing a child can knock any mother down. The next night, Toan invited Lam to sleep with him in the room. The two of us had a late beer and then went to the internet cafe. Played the game until 2 o'clock before returning to the room. Lam was so tired that he didn't even need to brush his teeth or wash his face because he fell asleep snoring. Toan washed his face and then turned off the light and lay down. At 3 o'clock, the toilet light suddenly flashed, on, off, on off. The flashing light made Toan open his eyes. From childhood until now, Toan has always been a light sleeper. If there's a slight disturbance, you'll wake up immediately. Or is the light bulb broken but no one turned it on? Everyone walked in the dark to the bathroom. The light bulb is now completely off. His eyes were not used to the dark, so Toan could not see clearly inside the bathroom. Toan reached out and groped for the light switch inside. A strange but familiar noise hissed. Fumbling close to the switch, Toan raised his hand to turn it on when he touched something on the switch. A hand. A hand is already there. Toan screamed loudly. Tatch tatch, a demon with black skin as if it was burned to death, wearing full protective clothing, was playing with the light switch. Toan fell back and frantically ran towards where Lam was lying. The bathroom light went out. Toan couldn't see anything, so he quickly groped around in the dark, afraid that the demon behind him would chase him away. Feeling Lam's leg, Toan shook it hard and called, but he did not respond. Toan looked up and suddenly realized that sitting next to Lam was the demon from before, making the gesture of spreading cement on Lam's body. His breathing was still heavy as in Lam's dreams. Toan's face turned purple and he ran for his life toward the door. Opening the door and running out, Toan screamed twice, "There's a ghost!" and then fell unconscious. The next morning, Toan opened his eyes and saw himself lying in the next room. Surrounded by Lam and Mr. Duo, the brother in the next room, whom Toan met the day he moved in. Mr. Duo laughed, "Hey, did you smoke anything yesterday and get high right in front of my room?" Lam also said, "I woke up this morning and didn't see you. I was about to call and saw that my phone was still charging in the room. At that time, this guy called me over here to carry me home." Toan stammered, "Last night, did you see anything last night? Why don't you wake up when I call you?" Lam replied, "I was very tired last night. I woke up with pain all over my body. I probably drank too much yesterday so I couldn't get up. No, I saw it yesterday." Then Toan quickly recounted the story he met yesterday to the two of them. After hearing that, Lam laughed. "Em is so distraught that she falls down in front of someone else's room like that. Tomorrow I'll tell the whole class to make my face look bad. Haha." After hearing this, Mr. Dio frowned. "It's really strange, I don't believe it, but of the people who moved into that room to stay, very few of them could stay for more than a month. There are people who move out at night, only to have someone come pick up their things a few days later. Some people don't even bother to come back to get their things. But every time someone else leaves, there are new people moving in, probably because the room price is cheap. I haven't met anyone yet to ask why they moved, I just thought they found a better room or something urgent." Toan asserted, "No, there's definitely a problem with that room, I have to call the owner." After speaking, Toan ran back to his room to get his cell phone and bring it to Mr. Duo's room. The daytime room seemed less scary. Toan dialed the phone and turned on the speakerphone for everyone to hear. It wasn't until the fifth ring that the owner picked up the phone. Toan said that the room he rented had some problems and needed to meet the owner to discuss it urgently. Hearing that, the innkeeper's cheerful voice disappeared. Instead she panicked, "I'm on a business trip, not in Taiwan, wait until I get home to figure it out." After speaking, she hung up the phone, not allowing Toan to say another word. Toan said, "There is definitely a problem, look at her hiding." Toan couldn't stay there any longer, so he asked to go to Lamb's room to sleep. Lamb's room is a bit small, so it's inconvenient. Mr. Dio said, "Okay, just sleep in my room tonight for now. Wait until we investigate to see what's going on. After all, I live alone. Because of the nature of my work, I often have to be away. Stay temporarily." Toan quickly thanked Mr. Dio and then went with Lamb to his room to get some personal belongings. Even if he gave Toan money at night, he wouldn't dare go back to the room again. Toan walked into the bathroom to get clothes, a towel, and a toothbrush. Inside the room, the floor was littered with mortar debris. When I looked up at the wall, there wasn't a single piece of wall that was cracked. This is strange, this is definitely related to last night's phenomenon. Suddenly, Lamb called out in a startled voice, "Toan, come here and see." Toan looked out and saw Lamb holding a chair and standing next to the ventilation hole high above. I was curious to see where this hole came out, so I put a chair up to see. Look what I found. Saying that, he held out an old piece of yellow paper. A talisman. This talisman is torn in half. I found this talisman stuck in this ventilation hole. When I touched my hand outside, I saw a piece of paper taped to the outside edge of the ventilation hole, but now it had come off. It seems like in the past this hole was covered up. On the other side of the ventilation hole was only the gray concrete wall of the house opposite. Toan quickly ran to the remaining two windows to take a closer look. Both windows have golden talismans stuck on them, but they are stuck on the outside of the door frame. Toan said, "It's strange, the charm has to be stuck on the inside, why is it on the outside? It's like directing a talisman to block something outside." Toan peeled off the two talismans and stuffed them into his pocket. "I have to bring this to the landlady to see if she dares to hide anything else." Lamb quickly stopped, "Please leave whatever is in the same place, why not peel it off? I'm starting to feel terrible." Toan said, "What are you afraid of? I won't be here anymore tonight." "Without this," she said, "I was making it up. Give me that tattered amulet too." The torn amulet was even larger than the two amulets Toan found. Having finished speaking, Toan grabbed some clothes and books and left the room, locking the door tightly. That day Toan wandered around the streets of Taiwan City. Toan was afraid of the feeling of having to get close to that room. Now going to my uncle's house is not a peaceful place. Monster land. Toan thought to himself, it's only been nearly a year since he's been here and so many things have happened. After wandering around for a long time, Toan stopped the car by the Core River and sat thoughtfully. Suddenly an old woman who looked austere approached Toan. "Boy, buy gum for me." Toan struggled to find his wallet and then picked up a candy bar from the plastic basket. "Why are you sitting here pensive? Your eyes look so sad, just like the old girl before." Saying that, the old woman suddenly sighed. Toan laughed it off. "No one will believe what I'm going through." The old lady gently said, "After selling it to you, I'm done for today. Today is the anniversary of your daughter's death, so you came here to worship her. It must have been 20 years. Toan felt sad. "I'm sorry, sister, she had a traffic accident on this bridge." "No," the old woman replied. "It's somewhere down there. It threw itself into the Core River and committed suicide." Toan just remained silent, not knowing what to say. Such a tragic death. The old woman began to shed tears. "For many years I have put all my wealth and house together to find her body, but the money is gradually running out and there is still no news. Now I can only sell street food. Stay alive." Every year, she only knows how to visit him on the exact day of his death, begging her to guide her and show her the way to find him, so that he can have a peaceful and beautiful grave. A mother's pity for her child made Toan's heart ache. Toan quickly consoled, in life, you have to see people, in death, you have to see bodies. What if she hasn't passed away yet? She's traumatized and has forgotten the way home. Just stay optimistic, you will find her. The old woman shook her head. It's impossible. After the day he threw himself into the river, a person living on the riverside picked up a gold photo necklace that washed up on the riverbank. People didn't dare take it, but they knew someone was missing, so they quickly reported it to the police. That necklace, she always wore around her neck and never left it. Seeing it, she knew all her hopes were gone. The police sent people to search all over that area but could not find her body. During that time, every night she dreamed of her soaking wet baby calling her, "Mom, I'm so cold, I'm so sad." I loved her so much that I couldn't let myself collapse. I had to try my best to bring her home. Toan, 20 years ago. She must be very young. The old woman continued, the girl's name is On though. A very beautiful name that she gave her, hoping that her life would always be peaceful, but who would have thought that fate would be so cruel, she foolishly thought. Ended his life when he was only 20 years old. Toan hesitated. What reason did she have to do that? In a slow voice, the old woman recounted everything that happened that year. Hereafter the story is told according to the memory of the character of the poet. I gritted my teeth and endured the pain. Each pain pushing into my lower abdomen felt like it was tearing at my intestines. I was sweating profusely, my hands clutching the lining tightly. That thing started to flow out, I could feel it. My little baby is leaving this life. My tears mixed with sweat dripped onto the floor. I screamed helplessly and my baby finally floated out. A bright red blood clot was lying on the lining, surrounded by flowing blood. I struggled to stand up and collect everything, my legs shaking. I'm sorry, I thought to myself. In my head, the sound of children's screams echoed, making my ears ring. I'm sorry, I don't want that, I mumbled. I buried my baby in a potted plant behind the house. That way I can still be close to my child. Who knows, soon there will be beautiful flowers on your grave. She is still very small, but I feel that she is a girl. A little girl will definitely love flowers. I lay down on the bed, face down on the pillow, sobbing uncontrollably. This is the only way to keep you by my side. He said he was about to go to Hanoi to get a job. The costs were expensive, he couldn't afford to get married right now, and raising another child was even more impossible. If I didn't have this child, I could go to the city to live with him, but if I had this child, we would go our separate ways. So I had to choose one. I called him, but he didn't pick up. Lately, I always feel pain, so I can't pamper him every time he comes to me. You're busy with work these days, I don't get to see you much. How about you? I love how healthy and cool you look after each shower, your back is shiny with sweat, there's no trace of dirt left at the construction site. I love the way he looks when he happily announces that next month he may be promoted. We both come from poor countryside. He also did not have any good education, only learned a trade and then went to work since he was 16 years old. I live with my parents, and now I just applied to work as a garment worker at a textile company. By chance, the two of them met and fell in love. I love you passionately. He worked hard but was still very handsome, hardships further carved out his toughness. How many times have I been jealous of these women around him? Even though I don't have much money, I still hope that one day I can go home with him and share everything together. I haven't been able to contact you for a few days now. My heart feels like it's on fire. I went to the motel room where he lived but couldn't find him anywhere. Rushing to the construction site where he worked, I saw the lights were still on. Maybe he's been on duty these days so he hasn't come back to his room. I walk step by step towards the light. It's 10 p.m. now. The light shines on the second floor. The first floor is filled with clothes and miscellaneous belongings of the builders. When I reached the top of the second floor, I heard a moan. I quickly ran up and the scene that caught my eye was him. He was lying naked on the white body of a woman. That woman is none other than the daughter of a contractor who often works with his construction company. I met her several times at company parties. They dare to do that again right in the middle of this dusty, smelly building. How dare he betray me after all I do? What about my child? My eyes darkened. When they saw me, they panicked and quickly grabbed their clothes to cover their dirty bodies and called my name. I can't think anymore. I can't think of anything anymore. I have nothing on my mind anymore. My head hurts, my heart feels like someone is tearing it apart. Loving someone and being betrayed, what pain is worse than being burned alive? I need water to ease this pain. Below me is immense water. The cold blue water. There were a few hands waving at me, inviting me to join them. I let myself into the air, feeling liberated. The gold necklace with the photo of the two of us printed on it that he gave me on our anniversary also blew in the wind and then opened its lid. The last clear image I saw was his smiling face standing next to me. The old woman's voice choked up when she finished telling her daughter's tragic story. After that time, the old woman returned to her daughter's lover's workplace to find him, wanting to get justice for her, but he had no word. Everyone who worked with him said that after that night, he disappeared without a word. Knowing the story, the contractor, the girl's father, had an affair with those lover, and came to meet the old woman directly, offering a large amount of money, hoping that she would keep this matter a secret, so that his beloved daughter could marry her. Kiss properly without any stains. She hated it very much, but at that time the house was out of money and the girl's body could not be found, so she had to close her eyes and accept his dirty money. To this day, she still regrets it. Times change now, the landscape also changes. Every time she passed by this place and that old construction site, her heart ached as if someone had stabbed her. That house is right nearby, next to a row of apartments that people just built. As if having a premonition, Toan mumbled, "I also have problems with the motel room." Toan was about to continue telling his story to the old woman when a skinny old man drove up on a motorbike, with offerings on it, gold coins, bank notes, and jewelry that looked extremely sophisticated and beautiful. It turned out that it was the old woman's husband, Ondo's father came to perform the ceremony for his daughter. Not wanting to hinder the two of them anymore, Toan quickly asked permission to go home. His mind was full of so many puzzle pieces that no matter how he turned, they couldn't fit together. Returning to the boarding house, Toan parked the car and entered Mr. Dieu's room. Mr. Dieu's room is smaller and more cramped than Toan's room, but it's still comfortable for two people. Mr. Dieu is cooking dinner on a mini gas stove. Toan stepped in to help. After eating, Toan cleaned up and the two brothers sat down to chat. Toan told him about the strange old woman he met near Core River today. Mr. Dieu asked, "Have you asked the old lady where the boarding house near the old house is?" Toan replied, "I haven't had time to ask yet, but I wonder if it's this house. Probably not, it's around here. All the houses are new, our boarding house has only been built for nearly 10 years, not even 20 years like she said." After listening, Mr. Dio said nothing more. After watching the clip online, Toan closed his eyes and lay down to sleep. 3 a.m. Knock knock. Knocking sound rang out somewhere. Knock, knock knock, the stronger knocking sound woke Toan up. Listening carefully, Toan searched for the source of that knocking sound. Knock, knock. It came from the common wall between Mr. Dio and Toan's rooms. The sound of knocking on the wall still rang out, making Toan's hair stand on end. Toan shook Dio awake. Mr. Dio closed his eyes but still clearly heard the sound of knocking on the wall. The two looked at each other in fear. Suddenly the tapping sound became faster, stronger and more hurried as the person tapping was gradually becoming more impatient. Then like a storm, the sound of clucking came from all the walls, surrounding the Toan brothers in extreme fear. The two of them struggled, not knowing what to do. They ran out into the dark night, making them even more scared. Toan suddenly remembered that the talisman was still stuffed in his pocket, so he trembled and pulled it out, then approached the first wall and stuck one of the talismans on it. The noise fell silent. Toan was relieved but still scared. Behind the silence is even more concentrated fear. Toan and Mr. Dio quickly left the room at night and stayed at a small motel. Toan felt extremely guilty about affecting Mr. Dio. It's true that that talisman was used to prevent something from happening in Toan's room. Lam was right, Toan should not have removed those charms. In the morning, Toan called the landlady again but no one answered. Toan and Mr. Dio returned to the boarding house to get more clothes. Mr. Dio carried his luggage light and finished packing a few bags, while Toan was still struggling with his books. Outside the room, there were noisy girls. Looks like they're renters from the neighborhood. Toan went out and closed the door when he saw a few girls huddled in groups outside the door of the first room. Toan walked over and just nodded to say hello. A small girl that Toan had never met before spoke up, "Hey, we just met and don't say hello. Do you know who this is?" Toan shook his head in confusion. What kind of girl is ungrateful? The girl smiled to reveal her dimples. "I'm the niece of the innkeeper of this neighborhood." Heard that sentence? Toan quickly asked, "Are you on a business trip?" Mai raised her head. "What are you asking for?" Mai was surprised. "I just came to see you. Can I have your address, please?" Toan urgently begged Mai, and finally she told Toan the address. Toan asked, "Do you know if there were any problems with this boarding house before?" Mai replied, "I haven't been here much so I don't know." Toan thanked him and ran away. Mr. Dio sat at the cafe opposite, waving to Toan. Mr. Dio chirped, "Hey, I just found out some very important information." The saleswoman said that this boarding house was not newly built. It used to be an old dormitory area, but people sold it, demolished it, and rebuilt it only in the last 10 years. Could it be related to that old woman? The waitress heard it and nodded in confirmation. Toan said firmly, "Now come with me to meet the landlady. I heard that she doesn't go on any business trips, she's still here." Finding the address Mai gave them, the two brothers rang the doorbell of a fairly sturdy house. Whoosh, the sound of the iron door opening and appearing before Toan's eyes was the familiar face of the owner. Seeing Toan, the owner's face turned purple and she quickly closed the door. Toan quickly held the door with his hand. "Let's talk, don't hide anymore." Having said that, Toan slipped into the house, followed by Mr. Dio. Sitting opposite the owner, Toan calmly recounted what he had encountered in the room over the past month. The hostess remained silent and said nothing. Toan held up the torn talisman and asked why there was this thing in the room. She denied it, saying that it was just a charm to pray for peace and protect the earth, but there was nothing wrong with the room. Mr. Dio also pressed, saying that if the room had no problems, why would everyone leave after just 1 month? After going around and around, she finally confessed that whoever rented that room also encountered unusual phenomena, but because of profit, she kept it a secret. She also invited all kinds of teachers to decode it, but still not successful. There was only one good psychic who could see that a demon was plaguing the land. This ghost has become a ghost and is no longer a normal ghost. However, when looking for the sound in the room, the psychic could not find it. It's everywhere but seemingly nowhere. It was as if she was floating in the middle somewhere. After finishing her story, she changed her tone, blaming Toan and Dio. If they didn't like staying, just move out. She would refund the money. Don't spread the news out and hinder her business. Toan thought, what an inhumane person, pushing others into miserable situations. Toan was determined not to let anyone else fall into the same situation of losing money and life as he did. Toan still kept the contract and asked for the good medium's contact address to find a solution. Toan called Lam and said he needed to go solve this problem and asked him to take attendance for tomorrow's class. Toan felt embarrassed and wanted to solve the problem himself, telling Mr. Dio not to come with him. However, Mr. Dio was still enthusiastic. I'm quite free now, this time there are no customers, I can help you. Briefly, Mr. Dio works as an interpreter, this time there are no customers hiring translators. Normally, when there are customers, he closes his doors to work all day. There are times when he goes on additional business trips such as working as a tour guide collaborator. Mr. Dio passed Toan at the address that Toan had recorded. The winding hill road stretches out before your eyes. It was not until late afternoon that the two brothers arrived at the beginning of the village listed in the address. The road leading into the village is dark and leafy. Mr. Dio drove slowly uphill. The leaves moved in the wind. The car passed each person walking slowly downhill. Toan looked. Some people cried and sobbed. Someone helped another person. Some people wander in silence. The car passed a girl. The girl has long black hair, a sad face and pale skin. She looked back at the brothers' car and smiled ghostly. Toan sat still in fear. This village is so strange. Asking an old man in the village for directions, he pointed to a farm located on the mountain. The two brothers hitchhiked at a local house and climbed the steps step by step. Smoke emitted from the temple. Outside the temple gate, there was a crowd waiting. They whispered, every day the medium only receives 2 people, no more. Bring anything from your house, if it's suitable, she will invite you in. Just received someone this morning. Toan is worried. This time may be in vain. Toan did not bring anything personal. Only wallet, phone, and motorbike keys. Suddenly the wooden door of the temple opened and a young girl walked out, then Dong invites today's guests in. This guest took something of hers and walked into the temple to return it. Everyone looked at each other and whispered. Totally disappointed, it's probably not me, I've never been here before. Everyone exclaimed, we are all here for the first time, no one is taking anything from you. The young girl calmly replied, it's a talisman you used to cast. Toan was startled and touched his pocket, took out the talisman lamp found in the motel room and held it up. The young girl said, please come in, I already knew you were coming. Everyone else please come back next time. Toan was surprised and couldn't believe his ears. The crowd gradually dispersed. Toan and Mr. Dio followed the young girl into the temple. The scene in the small temple is strangely quiet and solemn. Toan Dong is in the temple, sitting opposite her is a thin and pale young girl. Between them was an egg that had been peeled in half, inside the yolk is the color of fresh blood. Toan Dong said, "The wormwood is very heavy. Come here tomorrow to celebrate. Now go home, remember to do as I told you." The girl nervously stood up, thanked the bronze boy and left. Toan stood gingerly at the door, not daring to enter. Toan Dong said, "Come in, don't hesitate. Give me this talisman and let me see." Toan entered the temple and gave her the torn talisman. The psychic shook her head, "It's getting stronger and stronger." Toan Dong continued thoughtfully, 2 years ago, the owner of that place invited me there, to see a room." The medium waved her hand. "The yin energy is very heavy, like that of a hungry ghost, not a ghost. But it didn't come from that room, so she couldn't escape. So just know how to cast spells on 4 sides around the room to prevent evil spirits from entering. But now the demon is stronger. It tore up the talisman to scare people. It needs to get more positive energy to reincarnate. In addition, he died suddenly, plus he still had unfinished resentment, so he was stuck here forever. But the important thing is to find its grave, that is, its grave." Toan replied, "I don't know if this is okay to ask, but I thought it would be possible to call souls or relay messages to find graves." The medium frowned, "You don't have to teach me well. I don't feel this demon's grave underground. That's why we're helpless. It is necessary to find its grave in order to dispel it, to erase all its resentments that still linger in this world. Last night I was warned by him in a dream, saying that you would come, bringing my talisman, and that only you would have enough karma to eliminate this demon. Now you go home. Put this on, it will be okay for now. I also see that your maternal side, that distant relative, is having a big problem. If you don't resolve it quickly, it will be much more miserable." At that time Toan was still confused about the story the psychic had just told. He could only promise to bring his relatives to meet her. The psychic waved her hands, "I'm not qualified to solve that problem for you. I'll do my best to help you this time. Well, go home quickly. Fate will lead you to find that demon's grave. If you find it, call me right away." Saying that, the medium placed an incense bag in Toan's hand that emitted a very strong smell of incense. The psychic said, "It is forbidden to open it. In there I have covered everything. Keep it with you. Just limit returning to that room. It has already marked you, it is difficult to escape it." Mr. Dieu listened to the story from beginning to end, remaining silent and saying nothing. Toan and Mr. Dieu greeted the psychic and asked permission to leave. Toan has saved Mrs. Dong's phone number. The 2 brothers walked out the door. Turning away, the psychic called out in a startled voice, "Hey boy." Toan turned around in surprise. "No, I'll tell the boy next door." Mr. Dieu, startled, turned around and replied, "Yes, miss. Today is none of your business, but you still came here, it's considered fate with me. I can only tell you this. If in the future you are forced to board a bus with only 7 women on it, you must not take that bus and must get off immediately. 7 different places and 7 killings. Remember what I told you. What happens next depends on you." Mr. Dieu half believed and nodded his thanks to the psychic and then left with Toan. It's getting dark. The car traveled on a tiring winding road. Toan saw a familiar shadow flickering in the distance. A long-haired girl is standing on the side of the road. The girl Toan saw in the afternoon. She stood on the side of the road waving. Mr. Dieu decided to stop the car. Toan hissed, "Please go away, don't stop." The car lurched past the girl. Mr. Dieu asked, "What if people need help?" Before Toan could answer, the girl suddenly frantically ran after their car. Her eyes rolled back, "Give it back, give it back." Then raised her hand to scratch the air behind the car. Mr. Dio frantically turned the accelerator and ran. Toan cowered behind and screamed loudly. The girl ran incredibly fast as if controlled by some force. Normal people cannot run that fast. Mr. Dio opened his eyes wide and concentrated to drive as fast as possible. Through the pass starting to enter the city with bright lights and many people passing by, I didn't see the girl chasing me anymore. Toan was trembling with fear. There were several times when Toan thought he was caught by that girl. There is no feeling more terrifying than the feeling of someone running after you, life or death. Luckily at that time the two brothers were driving. If they had walked, we don't know what would have happened. Mr. Dio trembled and stopped the car at the intersection, then got out of the car and stood panting. Toan also jumped down and sat on the sidewalk. Toan said, "Brother, the devil is a difficult thing to talk about. Don't follow me anymore, it's dangerous." Mr. Dio shook his head and said, "The more dangerous it is, the more I have to help you. I'm alone in the city, no one can help me through this ordeal. I do this, also for my younger brother." Toan asked in surprise, "What's wrong with your brother?" Mr. Dio pulled out a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, smoked it thoughtfully, and said, "It's a long story, I'll tell you when it's done." "But how did you know and tell me not to stop?" Toan replied, "I've seen her before, she looks at us with very strange eyes, I don't want to make contact. And I don't want to tell my parents about this, I'm afraid they will worry." He said his boarding house was just rebuilt 10 years ago. "I think it might have something to do with the two old people I met the other day." Mr. Dio said, "Then go ask them about it." Toan scratched his head, "I didn't ask for their address that day." During the past 6 days, Toan and Mr. Dio wandered around the area near Core River but still did not see the old woman again. Totally discouraged. He didn't know when it would take for this to end. Over the past few days, Toan had to stay with a classmate. The scene of living on the street makes Toan tired. On the 7th day, Toan was wandering on the bridge when in the distance he saw a familiar figure. The old woman was standing on the bridge across the river, eyes looking far away down the stream. Toan quickly ran back, happy as if he had caught gold. The old woman was surprised. Toan said, "I've been looking for you forever. Why did you come out here today?" The old woman replied, "Ah, it's you. Last night I had a dream, dreaming of her coming back, standing on the bridge and calling me up, crying all the time. Today I missed her child so I came here again. Grandma, I have something to say, it might be related to her." The old woman invited Toan to their old, dilapidated riverside house. Toan sat drinking water in a shabby, damp living room. The wall was full of old photos of a pretty girl, each one smiling happily. Toan narrated the story he had experienced to his grandparents. After listening, the old man frowned. "There is a high possibility that your boarding house is near the old construction site of Hugh, New York name though. But you still don't understand what my story has to do with her except that the buildings overlap." Toan said, "Did you two say you couldn't find the whereabouts of Mr. and Mrs. though?" The old woman nodded in confirmation. "It disappeared without a trace, its clothes and belongings are still intact." So, have you met his mistress yet?" The couple shook their heads. "She hid in the house. Wherever you go, there are bodyguards. Only her father came here to talk. We can't do anything to her if we're small-minded like us." Toan said in a low voice, "Could it be that the demon I met is him? Can you come with me to the old construction site?" That afternoon, 4 people, including Mr. Duo, entered the house, now a clothing store located next to the neighborhood. The house has its back to the ventilation window of Toan's room. Using the excuse of examining the structure of the house, Toan received the homeowner's consent to come in and take a look. This house is currently being rented as a shop. Every night there is no one there. Toan searched for a room with a wall facing back to his motel room. It is the innermost room of the house. The second floor has now become a clothes drying rack. Toan asked about the history of the house. The tenant said that the old house had 4 floors. If he sold it to the current owner, he would only have to demolish and rebuild it into a 2-story house because there was not much use, so now he rents it. Back to cell from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Toan entered the room. This room is the store's warehouse. I don't know if it's in the back or out of the sun, but the air is cold. It's as cool as Toan's motel room. Toan turned on the light to observe the room. How strange. The surrounding walls are all new. Only the walls in this room look old and moldy. Toan quickly asked the tenant, and he said that when he rebuilt it, he didn't understand why the landlord kept that room and didn't demolish it. Remembering what the psychic said, a thought flashed in Toan's mind. Stepping out of the house, Toan's head was confused with thoughts. Toan said to the 2 grandparents, "I have this thought, but I don't know if it's true or not, and I don't dare to verify it." Toan remembered the psychic's words, "I can't find its remains on the ground." Add to that the words of the innkeeper, "It seems like it's nowhere, like it's floating in the middle." With a serious expression, Toan said, "I think his body is in the wall." After hearing this, the 2 men were startled and speechless. Mr. Dio, standing nearby, also nodded, "It's not unreasonable. The wall in that room has never been explored." He also disappeared without a trace, while the project was not yet completed, most likely. The old woman burst into tears. "Then who did that? Could it be Ando? She is that weak? Definitely not. No matter what, I have to find him, even if he's just a handful of ashes, you bastard. We will find a way to test this hypothesis," Toan said. In 20 years of living in this world, Toan has never been so determined. In the following days, Toan still had to go to school to study and could not neglect his studies anymore. Only Mr. Dew and 2 old men and women with austere appearance came to meet the current owner of the house to ask to demolish the wall. "Get out! Crazy guys! Psychopaths!" the chubby-looking man shouted and chased 3 people out of the house. After hearing the couple's story and their plea, the homeowner became angry. The story sounds so absurd. Just because of some wild words like that, did he have to spend money to demolish the house and then rebuild it? Previously, when the previous owner ceded the house to him at a cheap price, he was told not to destroy the walls in that room, especially the wall opposite the door. Only by keeping that wall intact can his business go smoothly, but it's best not to stay there. He didn't understand anything, so he just agreed to let it go. Does he even want to listen? On the day he started rebuilding the house, he still asked the workers to knock it all down to make it clean. As soon as the first blow of the hammer hit the wall, the worker fell unconscious. A few days later he died of a brain hemorrhage. No worker dared to touch that wall. Does he believe in ghosts? He took the hammer and smashed it against the wall with his own hands. The wall shook with pieces of mortar falling to the ground. That night, he had a fever. A life-threatening illness. After that period, he had to leave that room alone until now. Anyway, it's better to listen to previous advice. It is recognized that over the years, since buying that house, rebuilding it and renting it out, his business has improved significantly. Now he has enough money to send his wife and children to travel to this country and that country. Every weekend I go to Hanoi to rest at 5-star resorts. Now just because of these ragged people he has to do what he avoids doing. How long does it take? The homeowner slammed the door in the three people's faces. So their hope ended. The old woman collapsed and cried. For many years she searched for answers for her daughter's death. Now even seeing the body of the person who harmed her daughter was impossible. Now she knows what to expect to continue living. Her only daughter. The old man was silent and said nothing. Mr. Dieu quickly consoled, "You too, don't be sad. We can report to the authorities, maybe they will intervene." Mr. Dieu returned to his room and it was already dark. At around 7 a.m. Toan stopped by to ask about the situation. Mr. Dieu told Toan to stay tonight. Even though he was still a bit scared, having the fragrant bag the psychic gave him, Toan felt somewhat more secure. These days, Toan is no longer unconscious, nor does he wake up at 3 a.m. anymore. Toan stayed there for one night. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, a loud noise made Toan wake up again. The previous experience made Toan nervous. But Toan's room was quiet. The sound echoed from farther away, like the sound of destruction at a construction site. Toan shook Dieu. Mr. Dieu walked out and called Toan, "Toan, Toan, come here." Toan ran outside and saw noises coming from the house next door. Exactly from the wall opposite Toan's room. The two brothers rushed over. The store lock was cut by someone and fell to the ground. It seemed like the house had been broken into by someone. What kind of thief would be so stupid? Does stealing still make such a loud noise? Call the police, I'm so scared. Toan said. Slowly, Mr. Dieu replied, then slipped through the iron door and disappeared inside. Toan gingerly followed. The sound continued to echo steadily and became clearer and clearer. It came from the innermost storage room. Two people cautiously approached slowly. In the darkness, the figure of a thin man was using all his strength to hold a sledgehammer and hit the wall. Cock cock, the sound rang out dryly. That was Ondo's father. Toan and Mr. Dieu stood staring at the scene before their eyes. Mr. Dieu quickly ran back to stop the hammer from falling. Uncle, stop, this won't work. Despite warnings, the austere man still tried to smash the amulet into the wall, gradually revealing the brick layer. Looking at his pitiful obstinate appearance, Toan and Mr. Dieu backed away from the man. Finished his work. The father's pent-up love for his son over the years was poured into each blow of the hammer. Layers of mortar and bricks fell down, revealing a void inside. Gaining momentum, the nearly 70-year-old man swung sideways. Layer after layer of bricks crumbled down. Gradually everything was revealed. A dry skeleton stood intact in the wall. The skeleton was still wearing the same protective clothing as when Toan saw it. The bones were dry and black. Around the skeleton are entangled black silk threads. Horrifying scene. The old man fell down and fainted. The Toan brothers ran to help. Found it, finally found it? Toan muttered. Suddenly, Toan felt a burning sensation in his left thigh. Reaching into Toan's pocket, he pulled out a scented bag. Now it was hot and gave off an increasingly strong scent. Toan suddenly remembered the psychic's words, "If you find its remains, call me immediately." What should I do now? Toan asked Mr. Dieu. Mr. Dieu was tense. Tomorrow morning it will be discovered, it will be difficult for us to approach the body anymore. Whatever you do, do it now. Toan looked at the clock, 2:30 a.m. I don't know if the medium will pick up the phone at this hour. Toan called. The third time, The other end spoke, say. Toan stuttered, "Miss. I found it. Tell me the address." 20 minutes later, the medium was present in the room. The old man also regained consciousness. Mr. Dew helped the old man out. Only Toan, the medium, and the young girl who brought Toan to the temple remained. The psychic shook her head. "It's terrible. Turns out the grave is here. He has been imprisoned here for more than 20 years, harassing countless people and sucking the spirit of this land. However, he was murdered and did not want to be here. The resentment that has accumulated over the years has woven here into these black threads. He harasses partly to suck the aura of the victim, partly to hope that he will be found. Now we have to perform a ceremony to get his trapped soul out of here." Having said that, the psychic asked the young girl to take the things out of her bag. The psychic used dog blood to draw a circle with a few horizontal and vertical lines and some hard-to-read squiggly letters on the ground, then lit 7 candles around it. She sat in the circle, spread a red towel over her lap, and mumbled some incantations that Toan didn't understand. In the darkness, the candlelight clearly illuminated the horrifying scene on the wall, making Toan shiver. The clock struck 3 o'clock. The time when the demons rose strongest. A gust of wind blew in the flickering candlelight. The psychic said, both of them took the red ribbon from their pockets and put it on their eyes, then sat down with their backs to each other. "No matter what happens, don't take off the scarf." Toan and the young girl quickly followed suit. A cold wind blew into the room in the quiet night. Suddenly, Toan heard loud footsteps around him. Toan felt like a lot of people were entering the room. Extremely scared, but Toan still closed his eyes tightly. Toan saw the shadow of the medium shaking and jerking every time. Then suddenly she fell backwards, clutching her throat. Lone, the young girl sitting behind Toan, frantically stood up, groped towards the psychic, stood outside the circle and splashed some water on the psychic. She howled intermittently and then let out a long scream. Suddenly the surrounding glass windows shattered. Lone fell down. The medium sat up. The candlelight flickered back to normal, everything was quiet. Lone took off the blindfold and so did Toan. Lone rushed in to help her up. She gasped, "This hungry ghost just entered her body, it was buried alive, it was extremely painful. It can't breathe. It turns into a devil demon in the wall." She called the evil spirits to expel it from here. But there is an extremely powerful evil spell that stops it. That's why no one can approach this demon. It is the type of wormwood created for the dead, the evil wormwood, extremely terrible. Everyone must cover their eyes to prevent it from finding a way to enter people to escape temporarily. Thousands of evil soldiers have not yet been able to expel it. Now we must destroy Guy. It turned out that the noise Toan heard was the sound of the underworld soldiers recruited at the same time the demon appeared and entered the medium. Toan wondered, preventing people from freeing this demon, then why was that old man able to destroy the wall without any problem? The medium replied, "So there are only 2 possibilities. One is that the origin of this wormwood tree was created by someone who is related to the old man. Second, the wormwood was ordered not to harm the old man. However, to create this type of wormwood, the creator may not have intentionally created it, but to grow the wormwood, the creator must trade with his life, and the wormwood can harm both the living and imprison the dead. A kind of wormwood is extremely strong, feeding on souls and imprisoning souls, that's why it is called IAM soul. I've heard of you for a long time, but it's been so many years since I met you. It turned out that the people who tried to explore this wall were all possessed by worms. A loud noise came from behind the three people who were engrossed in the story. Looking back, Toan saw Mr. Duo, his face pale and falling to the ground struggling. It turned out that Mr. Duo had come back to see what everyone was doing. He witnessed everything from beginning to end. And of course, Mr. Duo did not cover his eyes with the red tape. The psychic quickly ran back to Mr. Duo. Mr. Duo was still writhing on the ground. Lone pulled out a needle wrapped in a piece of red cloth and gave it to the psychic. The psychic inserted the needle between Mr. Duo's eyebrows. A stream of black blood flowed out. The tip of the needle also turned dark. "It's not over, the ghost has entered the field. Now we must take this boy back to my temple." Saying that, the medium poured the holy water into the red towel that was spread on her lap and then spread it over Mr. Duo's face. While struggling, Mr. Duo suddenly lay still, only the sound of heavy breathing could be heard. Toan and Lone lifted Mr. Duo's shoulders with difficulty to lead him to the car. By 4 a.m., we reached the foot of the temple area. The psychic asked a few people to get up early to go to work to help Mr. Duo into the temple. They were very enthusiastic to help and seemed to be used to this scene. Entering the temple, the medium lit incense and prayed. Then she spread salt in a circle on the ground, let Mr. Duo lie inside, and then pulled out the towel. After that, everyone sat down opposite Mr. Duo. "Who is residing in this young man's body? Quickly declare your name," the psychic said as she sprinkled salt on Mr. Duo's body. Slowly, Mr. Duo sat up, his eyes still closed, his limbs still stiff. Mr. Duo sat swaying from front to back, then laughed wildly mixed with breathing sounds. Ha ha ha, his he he. Mr. Duo spoke, but in a deep voice different from his usual voice. It's been a long time since I've had this feeling, in that dark place, no one can hear me." The psychic shouted, "What do you want, that demon? Of course it's your yang energy, you and yours." The demon in Mr. Duo's body waved his hand. "But it's okay, his, now all I need is this body his." "Tell me what happened that day," the medium asked. "Bitch. His, that evil bitch killed me." "Who is?" the psychic asked. "It's been so long, I don't remember anymore his." "Is there a child on her shoulder? Who is it? Ha ha he his. Then the demon waved his hand in the air like he was using a trowel to sweep up the wall. "Get out of this person's body." The medium took the bamboo branch hanging from the bell in the corner of the temple and threw it at Mr. Duo's body. Lone stood and threw holy water. The demon writhed in pain. It stood up and was about to rush towards the medium, but when it got close to the salt circle, it suddenly stopped. The salt suddenly burned into a black ring on the floor. "Let me go. I've been imprisoned for too long." The demon screamed madly. The medium pulled out a talisman with words written on it from her bag. She bit the tip of her finger and wiped the blood on it. Standing up, she burned the talisman on the electric table, constantly muttering. The amulet burned out and Mr. Duo sat down, silent. The medium sat tiredly, rubbing her head. "If we don't deal with the wormwood tree soon to prevent this demon from escaping, it will soon eat up that boy's soul. The wormwood tree traps him in this world, struggling day by day. Now the tree's locking talisman cannot be broken. I can't exorcise the soul." Toan replied, "It mentioned a young girl who killed him. According to Ondo's mother, the last people he met were probably those two girls, Mr. Tho and his mistress. But now we can only meet one person." The psychic replied, "To clarify what happened that day, we must ask her about it. But AIAM soul was definitely created from a dead person. So the highest possibility is that Ontho accidentally created the wormwood tree from resentment before passing away, and now the wormwood tree is still working based on her last thought. The person who creates the evil spirit wormwood must give his soul to the wormwood. The soul is scattered and will die without a complete body. Now I wonder where she kept the wormwood for the past 20 years. Police surrounded a private house on a small street of Toan City. The store owner arrived as usual at 7 a.m. to find his store had been broken into. The inside of the storage room was in ruins. The alcove revealed a black skeleton with its head down in protective work clothes. On the floor there is a strange circle drawn. The store owner vomited, then trembled and called the police. Last night, what terrible thing happened here? Through examination, the police determined that the body was that of Bui Kong Hua, who was reported missing more than 20 years ago. On the sledgehammer left at the scene were the fingerprints of Mr. Van, a man living along the Kor River, and the fingerprints of Pham Hong Hua, who was staying nearby. The nature of the case is extremely serious. Police have not yet found the whereabouts of suspect Hua. Hua is nearly 30 years old. When the victim died he was only nearly 10 years old, thus eliminating the possibility that Hua was the murderer. But his presence at the crime scene is a big question mark. Mr. Van and Ms. New, victim Hua's lover 20 years ago, were urgently summoned. At the interrogation, Mr. Van did not testify but only affirmed that he was not the person who killed victim Hua. Ms. New was scared, crying in tears, not daring to say anything. The investigation is at a dead end because the traces have been eroded over the years. The contractor's doorbell rang. The maid hurriedly ran in to report, "Someone is looking for Ms. New." The old man with a big belly waved his hand, told me to go away. The maid replied, "He said if he doesn't let me see him he will tell the police everything he knows." He blushed and said, "Please come in." Toan entered the magnificent house and sat in the living room to wait. A moment later, Ms. New walked down, now over 40 years old, but her face still retained the noble and beautiful features of youth. His eyes were filled with sadness. "She's locked herself in her house for 20 years, not getting married." Just after Toan asked a few questions, she burst into tears. It seemed that hiding a secret for more than 20 years was too much for her. Like a pimple about to burst, in a choked voice, she recounted the story and that fateful night. That day she went to visit Hua, the handsome boy she had been in love with since the first time she met. Even though she knew he had a lover for many years, she couldn't hold back. They rushed at each other like two love-hungry animals. As promised to bring Hua to the peak of fame, he only needs to go to the city and get rid of his lover down here. Hua said he would think about it. What a fool, though really loves him, but Nu is the one who can give him everything. If he is rich and educated, when he comes to Nu, his future will be open, his dreams will come true. They were passionately in each other's arms when Tho appeared in the second-floor room. As if in a panic, she frantically covered her naked body. Hua quickly put on his shorts and ran to Tho to explain. Tho screamed and cried, punching Hua repeatedly. They struggled. Hua slipped and fell down the stairs and rolled to the first floor. Tho ran after him, like not daring to get closer to the fight. "It's quiet down there." Like walking down the stairs into the dusk. At the foot of the stairs, Tho was sitting next to Hua's motionless figure at the foot of the stairs. Tho turned back to look at Nu, her eyes lifeless and cold. As if backing away, afraid that Tho will rush into her and tear her apart. Tho smiled a wild smile. Then she walked closer to the unfinished tiled wall and looked inside. Then she quietly put on Hua's nearby protective clothing and dragged Hua close to the wall. Then she stuffed Hua into the wall in an upright position. She took a nearby trowel, scooped up cement and covered the empty space one brick at a time. All that was left were Hugh's eyes. New trembled in fear as he stood witnessing from beginning to end, his legs shaking as he sat down. What the hell is she doing? It was almost dawn when Hugh woke up. Seeing himself in a brick coffin, Hugh shouted, his eyes rolling in panic, "Let me out, what the hell are you doing, crazy, you bastard?" Those still sat thoughtfully next to him. There, calmly stood up, picked up a brick plus some cement and approached Hugh. Hugh knew what she was planning to do. He begged, "I beg you, I'm guilty, let me go. I will never hurt you again. Let's go," though. Those slowly placed the brick in the empty space, covering Hugh's eyes, while whispering something to him. Hugh's voice gradually faded and could no longer be heard clearly. Like crying. "It's terrible." Looking up, New was startled and stepped back. Poetry is standing quietly in front of me. Though bent down, smiled, and spoke in a cold, spine-tingling voice. "If you dare say a word about him, you will be like that too." After saying that, Though burst into wild laughter, "Ha ha ha ha." Hearing that, New trembled and ran out of the house. Running past though, she heard Though's voice very softly, "I curse you in this life to never age or die, to be born and never die, to be unrepentant in all lifetimes, to be unable to be reborn." After listening to New's story, Toan staggered out of the magnificent house. Toan advised her to turn herself in and confess everything to put her mind at ease. So it's clear that it was Thou who killed Hugh, causing nightmares for many years for the people in this boarding house. She locked him alive in that wall, an act so cruel. Is it just because of love that people can act like that? Are there any remaining problems? Toan thought to himself. So now I just need to find the wormwood tree, everything will be over. But for the past 20 years, which is so long, where did she keep the wormwood? Toan was walking on the street when suddenly the phone rang. Frantically, Toan reached into his pocket and pulled out the phone and dialed it. "Child. Uncle Dung just passed away. I'll go to your house right away for Mom." Toan stopped the motorbike. Bong hasn't even been 49 days yet. In the middle of the storm, so many things have happened. Toan is almost depressed, he hasn't been able to eat or sleep well for days, and he's also suffered from too much psychological pressure. Even though the night is dark. Letting go, Toan rode his motorbike straight to his cousin's house. Standing in the middle of the house was the coffin that a month ago was still lying there as baby Bong's coffin. Toan really didn't know what to say. Although during the time we lived together, the aunt had some prejudice against Toan, but after all, as a relative and the person who had taken care of Toan, Toan couldn't help but feel sad. Toan went into the house to meet the uncle. Within just 1 month, his face was completely haggard. Having lost both his wife and daughter, no one can calm down. Toan asked the cause of death. The uncle quietly shook his head. For a month now she hasn't eaten or drank anything, just standing outside in the garden all day looking up at the tea hills. Standing at night next to the iron door frame, smiling absent-mindedly. When she sleeps, she gets up in the middle of the night and walks around the house. He still fed her rice regularly. Last night, she sleepwalked. When I woke up in the morning, I went to the garden to look for everything, but it was too late. The cause of death is the same, as Bong, cannot be determined. The uncle held his head and collapsed. That night Toan had to stay awake to watch the coffin. My mind was filled with so many images that I had just seen a few days ago that made me feel goosebumps. Tired, Toan rubbed his eyes. It's been more than 12 hours. The sound of the flute echoed. Toan suddenly woke up. It turned out that Toan had just fallen asleep. Everyone around was still sitting quietly, no one said anything. The sound of the flute kept echoing behind him, making Toan uncomfortable. "Are you still playing the flute at this hour?" Toan has heard the sound of the flute many times, and almost every time he encounters an unpleasant scene. Knock knock. The sound of knocking rang out at the main door. Everyone looked at each other. Toan was sitting outside, so he stood up and opened the door. In front of the door, there was silence, only the night and the croaking sound of frogs. Toan was trying to close the door when a hand held the door. Toan looked up. "That's Uncle Dung. Hair is loose." The white eyes were located in deep eye sockets, exactly like the shape Toan had seen in the garden. His mouth was sewn tightly with threads. "Go home, let me go home, I was caught, Each word struggled to escape from the cracks. Before she could finish her sentence, Ms. Dung was dragged away by some invisible force. His pale, peeling fingers clutched the door and clawed for help. Before that scene, Toan fainted. In the morning, everyone in the house was busy preparing for the funeral. Toan is lying on the bed in the old room. Toan jumped up and hurriedly ran out. "Last night I was so exhausted that I fainted, just rest." Uncle Dang said, "Yesterday, did anyone see anything yesterday?" Toan stammered, "Everyone said they saw me open the door, then suddenly stand there, then fall down." Everyone thought he had been hit by the wind, so they quickly brought him into the house. Luckily, he was fine. "Uncle, I need to tell you something." Toan pulled Uncle Dang's hand. After listening to Toan tell him everything he had witnessed inside house, Uncle Dang pondered. Toan continued, "I never believed in spiritual things like this before, but from what I experienced, I can't help but believe it." Uncle Dang continued, "The day he brought Bong to the temple, the abbot told me. She died unexpectedly and went at an inauspicious time, suffering from severe mourning. I was half convinced, so I had a meeting with the adults in the house to discuss solutions. Some monks were also invited to come and worship to cure the insects. But Dung still. Surely things are not that simple. Uncle, I know a very good person. He also told me that there was a severe drought in my family. I will invite them here." Having said that, Toan pulled out his phone and dialed the Dong's number. The other end of the line spoke, "Toan. Your friend is getting weaker. Probably only last 2 more days. If we don't find the wormwood quickly, we'll lose another life." Toan frantically told the psychic the story of his uncle's family. The psychic still asserted, "Whatever matter is more urgent, we must hurry. The next deadline hasn't come yet, but there's only 1 month left. Once we've dealt with this demon, we'll be over there right away." After saying that, the psychic hung up the phone. Toan advised them to actively look for help and then apply for a job because time was too tight. Where is the wormwood tree? Toan drove straight to Ondo's parents' house. They were the people who knew her best. Who knows, Mr. Van is still being detained at the police station. Only the old woman was left at home. Toan told the old woman everything he had heard. She covered her face and cried, "I can't. She's so simple, she can't work so hard. It's because you forced her. Where does she keep the wormwood before passing away?" The wormwood tree was created from the blood, tears, and resentment of the person who created the wormwood. For the past 20 years since losing their child, they have never once dared to step into her room, afraid of that I won't be able to bear it. Saying that, the old woman pointed to the 2nd floor. The room is at the end of the 2nd floor, just try going there. Who knows, you might find something. Hearing that, Toan rushed to the second floor of the shabby house. The room at the end of the hallway has a white door lying silently. Toan grabbed the dusty doorknob and pushed the door. The door slid slowly with a horrible creaking sound after many years of not being touched. The smell of mold and dust rushed straight into Toan's nose, causing Toan to cough. The floor of the room was covered with layers of dust. The room is truly a tomb right in the middle of this house, a place where painful people do not dare to enter, do not dare to face, and cannot overcome. The room still retains the image of a person who has passed away. Gone a long time ago. Pictures. The books are still on the shelf. The bed sheet and pillows were still scattered. The windowsill was full of spider webs. Suddenly, the whole island's eyes saw something unusual. On the windowsill were a bunch of potted plants that had died due to no one cultivating them for many years. It seemed like they were alive. Ondo really likes to plant trees for sightseeing. There is only one potted tree. That potted tree is located on the inside of the windowsill. There is only one flower on the potted tree. The pink petal flower lay silently on the sill, the sunlight shining in strangely. It's incredibly green. In a rather large pot, Ondo only planted one flower for many years, according to the old woman, no one had stepped foot in this room. So, why is this flower plant still alive until now? Toan quickly ran to hug the potted plant and lifted it up. The flower petals curled up as if to protect themselves. The moment Toan lifted the plant pot, streams of liquid flowed down to the floor from the bottom of the plant pot. Blood. A lot of blood. Toan staggered and put the flower pot on the table, quickly raised his hand to look. There was nothing. Is it all just an illusion? However, this illusion tells Toan what needs to be done. Carefully taking every step, Toan carried the potted plant out of Ondo's room. Toan looked down at the floor and suddenly saw a wooden plank sticking up. Curious, Toan put down the pot and then began to pry up the wooden board. The board is located right in front of Ondo's bed. Time had caused the wood to rot and the nails to rust, so it only took a moment for Toan to pry up the floorboard. Inside the board was a faded notebook. Opening it up, Toan realized that this was Ondo's diary. The last day the diary was written, June 28, 1996, shopping through a few lines of text on the pages, Toan realized that in the last days of his life, Ondo was extremely panicked. Day, month, year, today you come. The clothes are cleaner than usual, the perfume smell is also different. Since when did he buy perfume? Day, month, year. He said he was going on a business trip for a week. We have to be apart again. I miss you so much. Toan's eyes stopped at a line of words. Days, months, years. I'm so nauseous. He said he had to leave the child. I do not want. I'm extremely miserable. What should I do? Mr. Though was pregnant. Having read that, Toan jumped up, hugged the potted plant and the diary and ran straight downstairs. The old woman saw Toan and quickly asked, what is that? Toan quickly replied, I'll tell you later. Then ran straight to the car. Toan used a rope to tie the pot tightly and then drove to the psychic's house in the temple filled with incense smoke. The psychic was sitting thoughtfully in front of the altar, right next to Mr. Dio's motionless figure. Mr. Dio looks a lot pale, his lips are bruised. Toan rushed straight in with fear, holding the potted plant in his hand, trembling. I think, this is a wormwood plant. All these years it's still been lying there, not wilted. The psychic jumped up and picked up the flower plant, still green and not covered with dust after a long journey. There it is, it's terrible, but, before the wormwood created, it must be bonded by the blood of the creator. Guy, although just accidentally created a terrible resentment before he died, so what is the covenant object miss? Before he died, although had an abortion. The medium was startled. A premonition ran through Toan's head, sending chills down Toan's spine. Have when? The psychic asked Lone to take a small shovel from the garden and gently dig up the soil of the flower pot with her own hands. The flower tree shook very strongly and then small drops of blood flowed from the petals. The psychic quickly put the black stone bracelet on the electric table on her hand and continued, telling everyone to stay away. The bracelet will prevent the wormwood from harming the psychic. Each layer of soil that is dug up causes the flower to bleed more and more. Gradually, the roots of the tree are exposed, zigzag like small blood vessels. The roots are bright red. The tree roots are connected to something at the base. That thing gradually emerges. A small figure lies curled up between layers of soil, very small but not unrecognizable. It turned out that Ondo buried his child here. The medium replied, the wormwood is made from Ondo's flesh and blood, and is supported by another soul, so it is so strong. Suddenly the medium dug harder around the wormwood tree. The truth was revealed. Lying next to the tiny fetus that had just been dug up was another figure. Also small, dry, and weak. A second fetus. Is Ondo pregnant with twins? Seeing that scene, Toan suddenly felt a piercing headache. Holding his head tightly, Toan fell to the floor in a daze, then passed out. Everything around seemed blurry. The person next to him continued to shake. Toan squinted his eyes to take a closer look. It turned out to be a little girl in a pretty pink dress, sitting right next to Toan, calling him up. Who are you? This is my sister. He. It's been a long time since I last saw you. The girl smiled affectionately. I don't have a sister. Toan replied, have you forgotten me? He. Honey. The girl smiled, revealing her sharp teeth. I'm so thirsty. Toan jumped back in surprise. Thirst for what? Blood. That blood. Her eyes turned dark and deep like a bottomless well, her pretty white face suddenly mottled with black streaks. I'm so thirsty, please help me, don't kill me. The little girl held Toan's hand tightly and did not let go. Toan screamed loudly and woke up. The psychic was sitting next to Toan, not the other girl. She was muttering some kind of incantation, holding a burning rosemary in her hand. Toan sat up, covered in sweat. Are you awake? Get out. You can't go near the wormwood tree. Why is that? I just dreamed about. I understand. The psychic replied, go out. Why is that? I want to help Mr. Dio. The psychic shook her head. Rebirth, past lives. The more you are around, the stronger the wormwood. How can I destroy it? The psychic pushed Toan out and slammed the door. Toan didn't understand what was going on, nor did he understand what the psychic said. What was that strange dream? Why did Toan's body react so violently when he saw the fetus's body? Lone opened the door and drove away on her motorbike. Inside, a medium is performing a ceremony to exterminate wormwood. She took out 2 life-changing dolls from behind the desk, pulled out the golden talismans from her pocket, then pulled out a small dagger, slashed deeply into her palm, and dripped blood onto the 2 talismans. Then the medium pasted 2 talismans on the 2 life-changing dolls. The psychic continued to take red hibiscus pollen and drew a matrix circle with a large star on the ground. She placed the potted plant in the middle of the circle, lit the candle and sat in front. When everything was prepared, Lone returned, carrying a basin of water. Inside was a pair of white fish. In addition, There are some candies and orphan clothes made of paper. Lone sat behind the medium. The medium began to chant prayers for rebirth, praying for the soul bound by the wormwood tree to quickly escape. Return to June 1996. That night, Ando slept soundly after his afternoon work. Her body was extremely sore. She cried so much that her head hurt and her eyelids were swollen. Her parents were both busy at work, leaving only Ando at home. 12 p.m. English poetry is heavy. Her stomach felt like it was pinned to the bed. Opening his eyes, Ando was startled to feel something sitting on his stomach. Looking closer, Ando saw a baby. A baby girl was sitting on her belly. That baby is crying. Red drops of blood flowed from the corners of his eyes. He called, "Mom, I miss you so much, why don't you let me see you anymore?" Mr. Tho burst into tears, his body still unable to move. I'm sorry, honey." Mr. Tho did not know he was pregnant with twins until the fetus floated out. "It must be the two daughters, my mother's two poor little daughters. I want to be with Mom, take care of her," the ghost of the fetus spoke. Mr. Tho reached out to stroke the baby's head but couldn't. "Mom, can you give me permission, Mommy?" Mr. Tho nodded and the ghost disappeared. Tears of regret rolled down the young woman's cheeks. From then on, she will always have a baby by her side. In her ears there was always the sound of children crying plaintively. After that night, Ando felt tired and exhausted. Hugh's mysterious whereabouts made her even more worried and miserable. Back pain tormented her. His body was thin and lifeless, but Ando inexplicably gained weight. That body doesn't seem to belong to her anymore. At that moment, when he saw Hugh making love next to another woman, the ground under Ando's feet seemed to collapse. She rushed to punch and kick the ungrateful man standing in front of her. 1 minute he slipped and Hugh fell down. Scared, Ando ran after Hugh, worried what was wrong with him. But the moment he saw Hugh lying unconscious at the foot of the stairs, the thoughts in Ando's head seemed to freeze. A voice whispered in her ear, arousing all the resentment, humiliation, and pain in her, "Mom, he doesn't deserve to live, he deserves to die in the most painful way. Let him live, he will make his mother suffer again. He belongs to another woman, right?" Mr. Tho couldn't think anymore. When she regained consciousness, she found herself standing dazed in an empty room, holding a trowel in her hand. She let go. The plane fell clang to the ground. Is there any point in staying in this world alone? Mr. Tho walked slowly out of the construction site. Her steps brought her to the bridge spanning the fast-flowing Kor River. Step barefoot onto the bridge. Ando looked down. The moment she left, no one knew. The wormwood tree shook slightly and then emitted a bright red smoke. Screams hissed softly in the wind. The sad, plaintive children's voices sounded like a song. The medium shivered. Never before had she encountered such a powerful wormwood. It is fed by children's resentment and hatred. Children don't know how to think or stop. She recited the mantra to escape faster, hoping the superiors would save this rotten soul. "Don't go, don't go, don't go," the girl screamed in the red smoke. "What do you think you can get by staying here? My mother and brother are all gone. If I stay, I will only harm others. Don't go, don't go, don't go." She was still mumbling. The psychic took the talisman that had just been sprinkled with blood, burned rosemary, then put the talisman on the candle, a talisman to banish death. The sound of children screaming in pain. "That's hurt. Go towards the light." The medium screamed. "Impossible. I need something, it's him, his apology." After the girl finished speaking, the red smoke descended down the tree trunk. The medium tapped the drum steadily and looked towards Mr. Duo. "Demon, wake up quickly." She used the bamboo stick that hung the bell and repeatedly threw it at Mr. Duo's withered body. Like a dry corpse, Mr. Duo sat up, his eyes closed, his breathing still heavy. "What do you remember that demon?" He trying to expel me, haha, no way." The psychic hooked a jade necklace from her collar, then ran back and pressed it to Mr. Duo's forehead. Mr. Duo's skin burned, accompanied by a horrifying scream. "Quickly answer me." I don't remember anymore. It was her and the child on her shoulders." Then the demon raised his hand again and waved it in the air like sweeping cement. That was probably the last image he saw before he died. Perhaps that is why, in the hallucinations of many people, the demon continuously spread cement as if creating a coffin around the victim. The demon kept moving. A repetitive movement. Surely it cannot be a meaningless act. The psychic looked at every move of the demon. "Oh. Do you still remember though?" The demon muttered, Though. Is her. You and she had a child together, remember? That child, is it my child?" The demon swayed. "Do you dare face it?" Without waiting for the demon to respond, the medium muttered the words to summon the soul. Red smoke rose again. "Father." The gentle voice spoke up, making people feel prickly. "Why did you make me leave you, to go with her?" "Dad, I'm in so much pain." Red smoke surrounded Mr. Duo's body. "Dad, do you know how much it hurts?" The demon writhed. Suddenly, Mr. Duo's limbs were bent, his body bent and pressed close to the floor. Screams rang out incessantly. "That hurts. Hey, aha. Stop it." The medium screamed. "I will take him away, take him where he belongs. But before that, I need blood, it's been 20 years. The red smoke said, "Don't imprison anyone else's soul." The medium took 2 human figures and waved them over the candle. The doll caught fire and burst into flames. The medium quickly sat down and muttered the banishing ceremony. When the doll burned out, she burned the baby's clothes and paper toys. She hopes these things will stop her from harming people. The medium performed a ceremony to expel the 2 souls in the wormwood tree and in Mr. Duo's body. Lone was so scared that she trembled and stood up to sprinkle holy water all over the room. Then she held a piece of red paper in her mouth and raised the water bowl containing 2 white fish high. Mr. Duo's eyes widened and turned white as the red smoke continued to swirl around faster and faster. His body flew 1 meter off the ground. 2 fish thrashed and splashed in the water. The psychic held up a mirror and looked at the red smoke. The smoke was sucked into the mirror. Mr. Duo's body fell straight to the ground motionless. The psychic quickly threw the mirror into the basin of water, covered it with a red cloth, and placed 3 burning incense sticks in it. The psychic then ordered Lone to carry a pot of water to a nearby stream to dump it. "Go straight to the stream, step out the door, don't look back, no one asks, no one says anything. Pour everything straight into the stream, remember." Lone nodded in obedience, removed the red piece of paper from her mouth, then hugged the water basin and walked straight out of the palace door. The psychic turned to the pot of wormwood that still had flowers in it. The flower is gradually withering, each petal falling off, the flower stem drooping and shriveling. The medium carried the flower pot to the back of the hall, where the furnace was, lit a fire and burned the wormwood tree and the bodies of the 2 fetuses. The psychic walked into the palace. When everything burned out, Mr. Duo sat up and coughed. The medium suddenly collapsed. Mr. Dio weakly ran over to help. Toan, where is Toan? Toan. The whole time I had been waiting outside the temple door, I had only seen Lone come in and out twice. I didn't even call her, so I didn't know what was going on, and I was extremely impatient. Hearing Dio's voice, Toan happily ran in. The medium turned pale in Mr. Dio's arms. The medium did not know that to end this matter, 3 lives would be needed. And she just burned 2 substitute dolls. What's wrong with you? Toan was confused. Quickly call an ambulance, Mr. Dio said. The psychic weakly waved her hand and then spoke. No need. No. There's no time. Our fate is over. From the moment he came back to tell me about you, he also intended to welcome me home. Being a teacher is not lonely but has a short life. Toan frantically dialed the phone to call an ambulance. The medium still tried to continue. Listen, your grandmother's severe illness, must find my master, he lives in Cao Bang, let Lone lead you, go now before it's too late. No. No. You help me too much many. The psychic smiled. My mission is that, to expel this demon, I have spent too much energy. After speaking, the psychic closed her eyes and gave up. Both Dio and Toan were dumbfounded. Something that begins with blood and tears will also end in blood and tears. Therefore, don't start a grudge. Mr. Dio and Toan placed the medium on the bed in the room behind the palace. Without its owner, this land is no longer sacred. Outside, suddenly there was a yellow cloud rising in the sunlight. It's her who returned to Toan. Mr. Dio muttered. Why hasn't Lone returned yet to end this matter? 3 lives are needed. And the psychic only burned 2 dolls. Returned 2 hours ago. Lone slowly and carefully carried the fishbowl out of the palace door. She passed Toan. Toan asked, what's going on, what's going on? She just remained silent without answering and then went straight. She walked out of the temple gate and followed the steps down the mountain toward the village. The small stream is located behind the village, flowing southeast. She was determined to go straight, not looking back, careful with each step. Nearing the stream, Lone was secretly happy. Just pour out everything in this pot and everything will be over. The souls trapped in these white fish will be taken to reincarnation by the river god. Going to the stream bank, she followed the trail that climbed almost down to the edge of the stream. 2 children were playing around near the stream. Lone didn't care at all. She was about to dump all the fish bowls into the stream when boom! The sound of children screaming, help, help, save my brother. It turned out that the 2 boys were busy playing, then slipped and fell into the stream. The stream is quite shallow, but for a child, he wouldn't know how to manage it. The 2 boys were only about 5 or 6 years old. By reflex, Lone put down the fishbowl and immediately ran towards the 2 boys. Lone waded into the stream and picked up the struggling boy. Miss Lone, a voice called from behind. Lone suddenly turned around and replied, hey, how do you know my name? She picked him up and tried to place him next to the older boy. The older boy suddenly looked at her and smiled ghostly, thank you. Then ran away. The baby lying in her arms was wet and silent. She looked down at her hand and suddenly shouted to let go. In her hand was the corpse of a mountain weasel. The medium's words echoed in her ears, don't turn around, no one says anything to anyone who asks. Lone trembled in fear and ran straight towards the fish bowl she left on the bank of the stream. The red cloth was blown up by the wind and flew across the water. Lone picked up the water basin and looked inside to see if there was anything left. The moment she looked at the mirror reflecting inside the water basin, Toan and Mr. Dew went down to the village. It's been 3 hours and Lone hasn't come back. Where can she go? She must be there to take care of everything for the psychic. Mr. Dew asked a few people and someone saw Lone carrying a water basin covered with a red cloth and walking towards the stream bank. Someone said they saw her walking towards the city. Toan and Mr. Dew found the way to the small stream behind the village. On the stream bank there was only a red cloth lying precariously. Where has she gone? Lone's belongings were left in the temple, there was no way to contact her. Toan and Mr. Dew quickly took the car and drove towards the city center. On the road, the two of them wandered around but still did not see any girl who looked like Lone. Where could she go? The banks of the Kor River are landslides and mudflats, with a gentle breeze blowing. Lone absent-mindedly carried a basin of water in her hand and walked towards the riverbank. The voice whispered in her ear, Hi there, it's a beautiful scene, go ahead." Lone obediently obeyed. She took slow steps towards the rushing river. "I'm so thirsty. You need to come down and drink some water." Hi. Lone put her bare feet under the water. The water is so cool. Step by step, she waded into the river. Toan carried Mr. Dew across the bridge across the river. Suddenly Mr. Dew pointed down, "Who is like Lone?" Right. Toan followed with his eyes. "That's right, her, that outfit is unmistakable. What is she doing? Why are you wading into the river? Lone. The two brothers tried to call out to Lone but she didn't pay attention, still slowly wading into the river. "No, we have to stop her. Let's find a way down to the riverbank." Toan turned the motorbike around. Small waves gently patted Lone's legs, thighs, and then her stomach. Lone's hand was still holding the fish bowl. Lone felt her head hot and her shoulders tired. "I need to soak myself completely," Lone thought absent-mindedly. The voice still urged, "Let's go, quickly, the water is very cool." Lone raised the fish bowl high above her head. The water was now up to her neck. Just a little more left. Mr. Dew and Toan quickly abandoned their motorbikes and ran quickly towards Lone's head, still bobbing in the flow in the distance. Another body was emerging midstream. A girl with wet hair, skinny body, pale white skin as if she had been soaked in water for a long time. The girl's eyes were extremely sad, a deep sadness. The girl came closer to Lone, raised her hands towards Lone. The girl rubbed the head of the girl sitting on Lone's shoulder and said softly, "Stop, my child. Come back to me. I'm still waiting for you." The cry rang out in Lone's ear, "Mom, you told me to stay with you, why did you go first? I brought him to you. Everything should be over, baby, just you and I. For the past 20 years, I've been so hateful. Please forgive everyone." That figure smiled very softly and kindly. Her shoulders gradually became lighter. Lone let go. The fishbowl fell face down into the water, the silhouettes of two white fish swam away and disappeared in the turbid current. The incense drifted, the mirror cracked and fell deep to the bottom of the river. Lone woke up and found herself in the middle of the river. She stumbled and screamed for help. Toan and Mr. Dew ran close and rushed down to save Lone. Lone's body was wet. She coughed and choked, her body shaking. I just saw Ondo. Ondo, what? Mr. Though is dead?" Mr. Dew asked. "She came to pick up the baby. The whole family reunited. Now everyone is gone, everything is over. The psychic burned 2 life dolls, but she still wants to take my life. She's too strong, Cough cough. If it weren't for On though, surely now I have become an ancient person. Lone continued, where is my master? Toan and Mr. Dew looked at each other. Let's go home first, go back and change clothes so you don't get sick. The three people staggered into the temple gate when the afternoon sun was about to go out. Lone rushed into the temple wanting to apologize to her teacher. She was unguarded and stumbled into the ghost trap, breaking the spell the medium had placed on the red cloth. Not seeing her teacher anywhere, Lone ran to the back of the house to look for him. Seeing her teacher lying quietly on the bed, Lone understood what had happened. She ran to the bed, knelt down and cried bitterly. I'm sorry, teacher, I'm late. In her mind, Lone still vividly remembers the words her grandmother said to her the first day she accepted her as a disciple. In my entire life, every young man like me only accepts one disciple, passing on to them everything I have. But in my opinion, you must always remember one thing, be ready to sacrifice when necessary. To stop evil, losing just one life can save the good sleep of many living beings. Once she was betrayed by Wormwood while casting a spell, she coughed up blood and lay motionless for several days. The psychic cried, "It's my fault, I dragged you into this karma." After that time, she personally cast spells and amulets herself, not allowing her to touch anything other than simple tasks. The psychic had no children, so she loved her as if she were her own child. She was just an orphan that she adopted at the temple. She took care of Lone and didn't lack anything. Memories rushed back and made Lone's heart ache. She cried hoarsely, "Teacher! Mom!" Theo and Toan stood outside the door, looking at the small girl with wet hair and crying beside the bed. They couldn't help but feel sad. A moment later, Lone trembled and pulled out the box from the drawer. Inside is full of paper. There were old pieces of paper with incomprehensible letters written on them. Lone's trembling hand lifted up a new piece of paper at the top. "I know right away." Lone's voice trembled. "She left a letter for me." The psychic predicted her death and wrote a letter to advise Lone. She entrusted this temple to her. Said that she was very proud and believed that she would become a good and extremely compassionate medium. Funeral preparations should be simple, not elaborate. She also asked Lone to help Toan solve the problems that plagued his grandmother. She apologized for not being able to perform the eye-opening ceremony for you, and sent you to her master to complete it. Each line of italic text was soaked in Lone's falling tears. After reading, Lone stood up. Wiping away her tears, the girl said, "My teacher doesn't want to see me this week. I will not leave in peace. Tomorrow I will be in mourning. In 2 days we will depart for Cao Bang. Please invite your entire family to come along." Lone looked at Toan. Toan said, "There's one thing I haven't had time to ask the psychic. That is, in the dream, that dead child demon kept calling me brother. So what? According to what I observed, based on my teacher's words, then maybe you are the previous life of this fetus." "Really, really?" Toan exclaimed. "The little girl knew when she met you, that's why she decided to borrow your life force to get stronger. It's also your fate, to wander here. It's you who can end this matter," Lone said. "Completely godless. It all sounds very absurd, but there is no other explanation." Mr. Though did not know that he was pregnant with a boy and a girl. She thought that both of her children were girls. The moment the 2 children passed away, the boy walked towards the light, leaving his younger sister still attached to the world. That boy reincarnated and became Toan, 18 years old this year, born and raised in Hanoi. Fate brought him here to solve his mother's story, about the remaining threads from his previous life. That's why when Toan saw his own body, he couldn't help but fall out of pain and fainted. After taking care of the arrangements for the psychic, early that morning, Lone and Toan left early, passing by Toan's cousin's house to board the car to depart for Cao Bang. The nature of the incident was serious, so after hearing Toan's urging, Mr. Dang also agreed to follow Toan to find the teacher. Accompanying them were a number of relatives on both sides of Mr. Dang. Mr. Dew asked permission not to participate. He helped Toan until everything ended, which is full of gratitude. Toan is extremely grateful that Mr. Dew put himself in a situation that was dangerous to his life. Now we have to let him return to his normal work and life. The police closed Hugh's case after New surrendered and recounted all the events. She had to receive a prison sentence for hiding the incident for many years, hindering the investigation process. Hugh's body was taken down and his family brought him back to his hometown for burial. The perpetrator of the case died 20 years ago. Those parents were extremely sad when they learned the truth. Toan has not had time to visit them, his grandparents in his previous life. The immediate situation is more urgent. The car followed National Highway 3 to go back to Cao Bang City. The closer we get to the hills, the more rolling and dense the fog becomes. The driver must go very slowly on the winding road. The weather phenomenon is strange. It was well past noon when the car arrived in Cao Bang City. Located close to the border, the landscape here has a mysterious wildness. The whole group temporarily rented a motel that was nearly full, and after lunch they would set out to find people. The house of the psychic's master, is located somewhere in the forest near Pokpo Street. In the afternoon sunlight, everyone bowed their heads and walked into the forest. Sunlight penetrated through the leaves, the dark forest stirred. A strange scene took place in the forest, ropes wrapped around tree trunks and led deep into the darkness of the deep, gloomy forest. The whole group seemed lost in a maze of wires. Normally this type of rope is coiled so that foresters can find the exit more easily. It can also be a guide to a certain place. But the important thing is which wire leads to the right place they need to go. Lone led the group and pulled out a red talisman from his pocket and burned it. Suddenly a string lit up in the darkness of the forest. Here it is. Saying that, she led the whole group along the rope. After walking for about 15 minutes, the group stopped in front of a solid stone gate that looked like it was old and rotten, covered with green moss. Lone was about to lead everyone in when a middle-aged woman appeared. She wore brown clothes and stopped the group. "The teacher won't come today." "What's wrong?" Lone asked. "The teacher said to go in large numbers, everything failed, please come back." "What's wrong? Everything is urgent." "Only 3 people can go in, okay, the teacher is already dissatisfied. See you guys another day." After speaking, she went straight and Lone looked shyly at everyone. The whole group walked slowly home. Uncle Dang was very angry, impatient for his family's safety, and went out all night. Lone reassured, "Uncle, don't be like that. I do that because I have my own principles. I heard your teacher say before that he was famous throughout the region and saved countless lives. After the age of 60, I retreated here to live in seclusion until now, meeting very few people. Even the teacher I asked to meet is still difficult. What's more? Just calm down." "How can you stay calm? Everyone's lives are no joke. Don't worry, as long as the teacher agrees to help, anything can be handled." The next day, the 3 people including Lone Toan Mr. Dang departed early. After having a light breakfast, the 3 of them went into the old forest from yesterday. Toan intended to ask permission to stay home because he thought it would be better for her father to go alone with Lone. But Mr. Dang said that from what Toan saw, if he went, it wouldn't be helpful. So, Toan agreed to go with him. This morning, dark clouds swirled in the sky, signaling an upcoming heavy rain. When approaching the ancient stone gate, it was pouring rain. The three people walked under a large umbrella and passed through the stone gate without seeing the woman from yesterday appear. Going deep inside is a path carved deep into the mountain. Both sides of the cliff hang colored ribbons with strange drawings and writing. With every step you take, the bells hanging on both sides of the small road ring softly. The sound gradually spread inside. Inside there is a lush garden, a small straw hut and a cave entrance. Teacher. Lone called. I am Ngayat Tam, my teacher and Ngayatha's disciple, please bow to me. Today I came here hoping you would help this person's family. The space was silent with only the sound of rain. Teacher. Lone continued calling. Lone's response was the sound of pouring rain. The three people waited for a while but still no one came out to greet them. The bell rang softly as if signaling someone was coming in. In the rain, a black shadow hobbling slowly step by step appeared. Toan squinted his eyes to see more clearly. The shape is very familiar. When Toan actually saw clearly who it was, a chill ran down his spine. It was the young man Toan saw on the top of the hill that day. As he walked, the ghostly figure shook its head with soft crack, crack sounds. Toan stepped back. Lone said, "Stand behind me." The young man in tattered army clothes, his head stuck to the ground, his head bent back, hobbled step by step towards the three people. Lone pulled out a red talisman from her pocket, chanted a spell, and waved it at the ghost. The talisman got wet in the rain and then stopped burning. The ghost frantically scratched its hands on the wall and ran towards the three people. Lone suddenly stepped back and tripped. Toan staggered along. When Toan's body was about to fall, a strong hand grabbed Toan's arm and pulled him up. That person was wearing a bright brown shirt and had gray hair and beard. That person waved his hand and pointed two fingers at the ghost, muttering something. While being aggressive, the ghost stopped and then walked backwards, disappearing in the rain. A ghost dares to come all the way here, it's too insulting to the superiors. Then the old man, about 70 years old, strong and sturdy, with bright eyes turned to look at the three people. Mr. Dang panicked and said, "What is that? Why does the bell suddenly ring? I don't see anyone, son of a bitch," the old man said. "You haven't opened your eyes yet, you dare to cast spells." The old man looked at Lone. "Teacher." Lone stammered. "Go home, I'm in retreat, I won't be coming today," the old man said bluntly. "Because I saw that the negative energy was too strong outside, I had to go to the rescue. Now I have to start from the beginning. Come back in 1 week." Having said that, the old man walked straight into the cave entrance, without looking back once. "Cut it out!" Mr. Dang shouted. "I'll find another way. What kind of teacher has no mind? People have come all the way here, he needs money or gifts. What do I regret? It's an urgent matter, can we wait?" Toan just kept quiet. Toan also felt a bit uncomfortable because of the teacher's erratic personality. Lone reassured, "Teacher is not a cold person. There must be a reason why the teacher is like that, but if he accepts to help anyone, he will help him to the end. Just be patient one more time. To invite good people requires patience." Liu Bei even tried 3 times to invite Kong Min. Mr. Dang was silent. The three stumbled back in the rain. The following days passed in heaviness and fear. It keeps raining all the time, making people's mood gloomy. Saturday morning, the sun was shining. The three people walked alone on the path into the forest. The scenery is completely clear. The three people walked down the same path as before, and the bells rang softly. The straw tile house smells faintly of incense. Lone led everyone into the house. The teacher is sitting on a counter in the middle of the house, in front of a large altar that fills the entire house. "Sit down," the teacher said. The middle-aged woman from the other day quickly poured tea for guests. "Heartless and asexual." The teacher's voice twitched. Who? Lone asked. "This father." The teacher pointed straight at Mr. Dang's face. "Let my daughter play with ghosts for many months without paying attention, without monitoring to stop it in time. Now that I've lost my child, can I get it back? Is work as good as a daughter?" Mr. Dang could only sit trembling and stammered, "Please, save my family." The teacher replied, "Your house is in serious trouble. This ghost is determined to catch them all. We have to go into seclusion to practice more and have enough mental strength to deal with it. Last time he dared to come all the way here to stop someone. It's very cunning, it doesn't know what fear is." The old man lit a cigarette and took a deep breath. "Well, prepare to depart for your home." The whole group immediately returned to Toan that night. The next morning, the teacher was at Mr. Dang and Mrs. Dung's house. Toan had to request a one-semester stay to resolve family matters. The teacher said, "If you want to know about the sound, it is best to ask the person about the sound. There was a son at home who died young, right?" Mr. Dang was startled and nodded in confirmation. My older brother passed away when he was 25 years old. My maternal uncle, Uncle Dang's older brother, died in a traffic accident when he was 25 years old. At that time, Toan was not yet born, so he had no idea about his uncle, only occasionally being called back to celebrate his death anniversary. The teacher nodded. "This afternoon, let's do the soul calling ceremony." Then the teacher wrote down on paper what needed to be prepared for the soul calling ceremony and asked everyone to go by it. Early in the afternoon, the ceremony began. The priest arranged all the offerings on the small altar and began to pray. Everyone sat around him in a silent circle. In his left hand, the teacher holds 3 sticks of incense, and in his right hand, he holds a small vase filled with only 1 willow branch. The teacher suggested closing all the room doors. In the closed room, nearly a dozen people sat. The atmosphere was a bit stuffy. After a long prayer, the willow tree in the teacher's hand suddenly rotated in the jar and gradually bent down. Suddenly, in the closed room, there was a chilling draft of wind. While sitting still, Toan felt a shock coming. Everything was black. I couldn't remember anything anymore. At that moment, the people around Toan saw him suddenly collapse and nod. The teacher asked, "Who is that rep?" Toan looked up, his eyes blank. He sat cross-legged and said in a strange, low, and slow voice, "Give me a cigarette." Everyone was surprised because Toan never smoked. The uncle sitting next to him took out a pack of cigarettes and lit one for Toan. Toan smoked and looked into the distance. The teacher asked, "Can you pick them up?" Toan shook his head. "No, I was going to pick it up, but he wouldn't let me." "Who is that?" "God of wealth." Toan held his head. "Can I ask Quan Am for help?" Toan shook his head. "Are not being infected, the evil soldiers want to come and capture them all. It's been bribed." "What about the land?" The teacher continued to ask questions. Toan slowly replied, "I still prevent it from entering, but it always lures people out. There's no way, I can't stop it. The teacher sighed. So what should we do? Toan looked around as if afraid someone would hear him and then whispered, find a grave. Well, I have to go. They're here. As Toan finished speaking, he suddenly collapsed, causing everyone around him to fall. Gather around to help. Toan was unconscious for a day and a night. The next day, Toan opened his eyes. Toan found himself still lying in the old bed, no one around, the house was quiet. Toan felt aches and pains all over his body. The whole family walked out of the house. Looking towards the top of the tea hill behind, Toan saw some people standing on it. Toan followed the trail up. Uncle Dang led the teacher to the top of the tea hill behind the house, where Bong and her mother passed away in a very strange state. The teacher pulled out an octagonal board, in the middle of which was a clear sphere containing a needle. Standing in that position, the needle was spinning endlessly. That morning, the teacher asked Mr. Dang to find a long bamboo stalk, young and green, flexible and hollow. At that place, the teacher asked everyone to nail the bamboo tree to the ground. They prepared the blood of a white chicken and put it in a jar with a tight lid. The teacher folded a golden talisman without any words into the blood jar and then stuffed it into the bowels of a bamboo tree. After plunging the bamboo stake deep into the ground, everyone scattered and returned. Mr. Dang was very impatient, kept going in and out. If according to the rules, in less than 49 days of the children's mother, his family of 4 would only have 1 left. If he leaves, Ben will only be an orphan. Lately, without his mother, the boy is often sad and irritable. If it were a boy, he really couldn't stand it anymore. Seeing Mr. Dang's appearance, the teacher only said a short sentence, if you want to speed up, you won't achieve it, and then went to the front porch to smoke a pipe cigarette. During meals, he also does not eat meat or fish, only eats rice with some peanuts. Every morning, he still calmly meditated qigong in the garden, feeling like the teacher was not in a hurry and had nothing to do with the world. That evening, Lone sat and talked with the magician. Lone cried and told about her female psychic. The teacher sighed, I know. It's doomed. When we accepted him as a disciple, we also knew what his fate would be. As a teacher, you know many things better than everyone else, but you also have more disadvantages than everyone else. If you don't die, you will die. That's the price to pay. The other day I saw him come back to say goodbye. What about you? Are you sure you want to open your eyes? Lone nodded resolutely. I must complete my teacher's tasks. The teacher smiled and said nothing more. The next morning, everyone went back to the old place and dug up the bamboo stick. The young bamboo tree submerged in the soil has now turned yellow. Seeing this, the teacher quickly pulled out the jar of chicken blood hidden in the bamboo tree. The red blood had turned black as ink. He took out the plain white talisman from yesterday and opened it in front of everyone. The talisman was still wet with blood, but the yellow color had not faded, and Toan could clearly see the red letters on it crisscrossed like a spider web. Strange. Did someone dig up the bamboo stick last night and change everything? It was a grave test. And there is definitely a grave here, but a poisonous grave, covered with dragon veins. Time did not allow for any more hesitation. That afternoon, the magician asked to exhume the grave. Several times he tossed a coin to ask for a hexagram but failed to receive approval, so the teacher was extremely impatient. The teacher said, if we can't exhume the grave today, we may have to wait another 3 days for a good day, but if we exhume the grave, things may not go well. Thinking for a while, Mr. Dang decided to exhume the grave immediately. He could not persist any longer. They called more people to come and dug straight down from the point where the bamboo stake was buried. Nearly a dozen people dug diligently from afternoon to evening to reach 3 meters. Gradually the shovel's strokes touched a very hard surface. People are starting to be more cautious. Each thin layer of soil was scooped up, gradually revealing an underground door. Mr. Dang quickly ran back and rubbed away the remaining soil. On the underground door there is a large talisman, the 4 ends of which are hooked with a red thread, pulled to the corner of the underground door. "Get out of the way," the teacher said, and then slowly climbed down into the newly dug space. The teacher tried to grab the talisman, but it was attached too firmly, the red threads pinning it even tighter to the door. The teacher took a black wooden stick from his pocket, lit it and burned 4 threads on 4 sides. The red threads gradually burned and spread to the amulet. The amulet caught fire and flickered in the strange blue light. Then, the teacher asked everyone to pry up the cellar door. The door panel was equally sturdy, several strong men had to use a sledgehammer to break it. Toan witnessed everything from start to finish. No one told him to do heavy work, so Toan just hustled around cleaning and doing odd jobs. That's all, he was exhausted. "I used to be a non-superstitious person, but the events that have happened over the past few months have completely turned Toan's life upside down, leaving Toan unable to change his mind." The cellar door was broken to reveal a small, narrow staircase, only big enough for one person. Still holding a burning firewood in his hand, the teacher went down first, followed by Lone and Mr. Dang, and finally Toan. The rest were above waiting for news. The stairs lead to a quite large and dark cellar. Each person, one by one, followed the small light shining from the homemade torch that the teacher held. The cellar is strangely cold, as if it is located deep and wide in the heart of the T-hill. Looking at the structure of the basement, it must have been built several decades ago. The walls are old and worn out. There are so many things scattered on the ground. Toan was curious and opened a jar to take a look. Gold, is gold. Gold scraps filled a jar. There are several jars like that. When Toan opens them, he sees them. In the other corner of the cellar, Lone found a lot of brocade fabric and delicate porcelain. It seems that this is a vault containing treasure. When he was a child, Toan often played treasure hunting games with his friends. Thinking back, it seems so childish, but now Toan found a whole fortune right underground, with his own eyes and ears. The teacher walked straight, without looking around, ignoring everyone's admiration, as if he knew clearly what was in the cellar. Going to the end of the cellar, everyone found a small locked room. Mr. Dang took a nearby crushed stone and smashed it hard on the lock. The old lock fell off after a few hits. The door is opened. Everyone suddenly froze. The room was full of scratches as if some animal was scratching frantically on the wall, even the back of the door. The room was very small, and in the middle of the room there was a dark shadow. It was the body of a man who had shriveled up in worn army clothes and was no longer recognizable. That person sat in a strange position, the limbs are curled up and fixed by a long chain. The man's eyes and mouth were tightly covered with strips of white cloth, with golden talismans on them. Next to the man there was nothing except a crude flute. This was the second time in a short period of time Toan saw such terrible scenes. He sat down and vomited. Lone also turned pale and ran straight out of the tunnel. The teacher shook his head. "It's too cruel, detaining someone here until death to make them the guardian of an ancient Chinese magic. With a soul as the guardian of wealth, everything that needs to be kept will be preserved forever. This person will be a living person, perform a purification ceremony, declare his name and then be locked here, tied up, and starved until he dies." After death, his eyes and tongue will be gouged out so that he cannot reveal any secrets. The neck was broken to rotate 360 degrees, looking after all four directions here. Toan ran out of the cellar, unable to bear it any longer. Toan remembers the sound of the flute ringing in his ears every time something happened. Or did that person use the sound of the flute to call for help? What really happened here according to the victim's story? In August 1948, the war was entering a fierce stage. Boom. Boom, each artillery shell was continuously bombarded by the enemy at the ambush point. Looking around, my teammates were crawling little by little on the ground, everyone's faces covered in artillery powder, hoping to break the enemy's siege. The constant sound of gunfire made my ears ring. There was smoke and dust in front of me, my visibility was reduced. I still fired my gun at the enemy, hoping to kill a few of them, loosening the grip that was gradually tightening. Reinforcements arrived, bringing grenades and three-pronged bombs. The squad leader frowned firmly and then shouted, "I will take the three-pronged bomb and go first, you guys will cover the rear. Remember, once you break the siege, immediately withdraw your troops and don't look back." Everyone protested, "No way. We never abandon our teammates." The squad leader was angry, "There is no sacrifice, there is no way out. One person for everyone, rush forward." Then he grabbed the three-armed bomb and rushed forward. Everyone had to cover the rear and follow closely behind. When approaching the enemy's encirclement, the squad leader rushed in holding a bomb. The bomb exploded. The enemy scattered. Everyone swallowed their pain and hatred and ran straight outside. Someone opened the way in front, someone covered the rear, the whole squad retreated. More than 24 people ran as the gunfire behind them grew closer and closer. This forest of difficult terrain can be a maze with no way out. Dang, the gunfire rang out again. Huang, the last runner in the team, collapsed. I froze. "Keep running." Tame shouted. I had to keep running. From the bushes ahead, a few French soldiers jumped out to block the way. We were ambushed. They fired guns at us. Everyone quickly hid behind rocks and tree roots. After several rounds of bullets, they moved closer. Tame shook his head. We divided into 3 directions. I and 3 other people ducked down the steep hill on the right. The enemy followed closely. Gunfire was still roaring in the background. The sound of gunfire rang out very close and I felt my body become heavy, losing gravity. I rolled down the hill, the grass and trees stinging my face. The last thing I heard was Nam's voice, "Ben." The rain falls drop by drop. I opened my eyes. The intense pain made me unable to breathe. My body was stiff and I couldn't move. I still lie in a place covered with dense vegetation. I touched the pocket of Din's chest and pulled out a familiar flute, but my hands were too weak to do it. "Help, save me," I whispered. I thought to myself, why don't I die? I fainted again. Bright. The sunlight shining directly into my eyes woke me up. I weakly raised my hand to cover my eyes. My hands are dry and covered in blood. Suddenly two dark shadows approached. They bent down, blocking the bright sunlight. "Help, save me." They helped me up. The pain became more like screaming. Then everything around me became dark again. Opening my eyes for the 3rd time, I found myself lying on the bed. There were white bandages all over. "Where am I? Are you awake?" A middle-aged woman walked in. Here's the porridge. Let me help you up so you can drink it." After sipping the porridge, I weakly asked, "Where am I? Where are my teammates?" 2 days ago, I went to collect firewood for the stove with my husband and saw him lying in the forest and rescued him. I am the only child of this house. I asked the boss for permission. You'll stay here until you get better. Good. So good, I stammered. Thank you very much, and have you seen someone else, my teammate? They also wear clothes like this. I just heard that the enemy ambushed a company of our troops nearby. I heard that only a few people escaped. You're lucky too. Well, don't think anymore. Try to rest well. My leg was splinted. Probably broken leg. Falling like that is still light. I don't understand why I'm still alive and lying here. The right leg is covered with a bandage. Extremely painful. I remember now. I got shot in the leg. Long days passed, and I received the care of the maid and her husband. Several times I walked out of the small storage room where I lay. The house is extremely spacious, but it seems that the owners are not always present here. When asked about it, I received an explanation: this is just one of my grandparents' houses. My family has worked for the boss's family for many generations. The boss's family is a famous landowner in this area, very rich. Now the owners live in Toan and entrusted this house to us to take care of, mainly to worship our ancestors. I nodded through the story. I was extremely impatient. My wound was taking a long time to heal and I wanted to return to the unit to continue fighting with everyone. One morning, when I woke up, I didn't see the couple passing by, so I hobbled up and struggled to go out to look for them. I was convinced that there was no one at home until I got close to the door of the main house. Are they here? Curious, I approached the slightly open door. Not. Do not they? There were quite a few people inside. They are discussing something. Mostly clean, luxuriously dressed men are sitting and enjoying tea in a cup continuously poured by a woman. The man sitting in the middle has an imposing figure and mustache, raising his pipe to smoke. Look at my newly bought Western suit. Same style. The other man interrupted, and what about that? How I also have to find someone, right? What do people lack? The pipe-smoking man replied. Not only that, I already have it at home. It's up to you. Don't neglect what's good for the family. I was sweating. Fingers trembling. I quietly withdrew from the door, leaving the conversation. What are they planning? I don't think anymore. After all, it's their family's business. What I hope most now is to be able to return with everyone. My platoon, who's left. There were nights when I couldn't sleep. The images of the battlefield were so fierce it made me feel unreal. This peaceful, boring life of 3 meals a day doesn't seem to belong to me. I remember the nights spent on campaign, eating potatoes and tubers dipped in salt with my comrades. I like playing the flute. I keep one with me, in my breast pocket, at all times. One time, a bullet grazed my chest but was stopped by the flute. Since then, I have appreciated my flute even more. If I lose this tree, I will carve another one. Sometimes when I'm lost with my teammates, I just have to play a little flute song and wait, someone will come looking for me. Playing the flute makes me think back to the peaceful years of my childhood, herding buffaloes with the children in the village and competing in playing the flute. There are nights when I have nightmares. My whole squad ran forever and couldn't get anywhere. Each person, one by one, gradually disappeared. I'm left alone in the dark night. The wound keeps hurting but doesn't heal. Lately I rarely see my grandparents and my husband. Only a messy girl brings me food, comes and goes without saying a word. I feel like I'm imprisoned. One night, When I saw a woman's figure walking closer to the room I was staying in, I was extremely happy. Seeing her, I quickly said, "Uncle. Long time no see you. I have something to say." The woman interrupted, "Ben. His parents intended to take him back to Toan to take care of him more conveniently. I heard that your wound has never healed. I also feel very worried. Going up there would be better than staying here with these two old people who are busy all day." I hurriedly said, No. I don't need it. There's also medicine in the war zone. Even though we are in need, we still have teammates. Now no one here knows how he will live or die, so everyone must be very worried. Please tell the owner. I really appreciate it, but I have to go home. You can't say anything in advance. You're a boss. After all these years of saying it, it's hard not to follow. Okay, I'm going to do something." With that, the woman walked out the door as quickly as she came. That night, I made a plan to escape. I had nothing on my belongings. I brought some food and put it in old army clothes. I put it on and waited until night came to sneak out. The owners are still here. They have never come to visit me. I have met the landlady a few times and she just nodded and said hello. Why are they suddenly so enthusiastic about treating me 2 o'clock at night? There was only the sound of frogs croaking around. I lay down and waited until then, looked around, snuck out into the yard and headed towards the back gate. Step by step, I tiptoed and carefully looked back and forth. Approaching the rotten wooden gate behind the garden, I pushed the door, but it was locked. If my leg was healthy, I could have climbed over the wall and gotten out easily. Grabbing a broken brick lying nearby, I used all my strength to hit the lock as hard as I could. After a few hits, it gradually shook. Lucky, but I didn't notice how loud the noise was. Pop! Something very heavy hit my head. Opening my eyes, I saw that I was stalling on an antique French car. I have only seen it through pictures in books and newspapers, but have never seen it with my own eyes. Next to me is a muscular man. There is a driver in front. Where am I? Drop me down. The fat guy turned around and said, "You get to eat and sleep for free, but you still want to run away without repaying the favor." Viet Cong guy bounces. I will be back. My teammates need me. I can't stay there and live like a deserter. I shouted at it. Shut up. If you're smart, let your boss fix this lame leg for you. The car drove for several hours before arriving at a massive house in Toan. I was thrown into a small room on the second floor. There was someone guarding me every day. I don't understand why they kept me there. It's better to hand me over to the French soldiers than to live aimlessly like this. Although they are known as the owners, I have never had a private conversation with them. There were only a few maids taking care of me. No matter what I asked, they didn't answer. I almost went crazy. 1 month later I was forced to eat and take medicine regularly. My health improved significantly. Why couldn't it be like that in that house? My wound is almost completely healed. In my room, I still practice walking regularly, and now I can walk almost normally. That morning, I was woken up and invited to the living room to meet the boss. I was extremely surprised because this was the first time I met him. I was seated in a large dining room, with a glass table in the middle. At a time when people were suffering, he was still so rich, it was truly admirable. A moment later a man in a suit walked in. It's him. The man I saw through the door last time. He smiled and ran over to shake my hand. The meal is served. It's full of delicious flavors that a kid like me has never dared to dream of since childhood. I refused the meal because I felt uncomfortable. He enthusiastically invited, a glass of wine in his hand. I heard, where did you intend to break through the back gate last time? Did Mr. and Mrs. Toan treat you so badly? Let me question them. No, no, I waved my hand. They treated me very well, even the owners. I don't dare complain, I haven't paid back the favor yet. It's just that I want to return to the unit. Haha, just stay here until you get better. When it's done, I'll take you home. Before that, can you do me a favor? He smiled strangely. Yes, I hope the boss will let me go home soon. There's really nothing missing here, but I'm not very familiar with it. That's okay. You just keep eating. Someone, pour him some wine. Good French wine. Try it, I'm sure you've never tried it before. But lately, you look much better. Yes, I'm almost completely recovered. I guess I won't have to bother you anymore. Having said that, I took the glass of wine from the waiter's hand. Take a big sip. The wine is truly delicious, better than the bitter wine I drank with my brothers. I ate a large piece of cauliflower with a strange-looking piece of beef. Strange, but delicious. Take another sip of wine. I felt like I was starting to feel dizzy. Why does this wine absorb so quickly? I tried to open my eyes to see, but everything around me began to shake. What I saw was the boss's smiling face. Then I collapsed. I woke up again. This time the scene was not as bright as before. My head feels as heavy as lead. I tried to move, but my limbs seemed to be tied tightly. The sound of shovels and chains dragging on the ground. I stood up, banged on the wooden door in front of me. Is there anyone? Help me, why am I here? Or I've been handed over to the French army. Is anyone there? I stayed there for 1 day and 1 night, my body was weak. There are times when I still get up and bang on the door loudly. The next morning, the door opened. It seemed like I was in a dark cellar. Someone, help, help. I stammered. That person tightly covered my mouth so I could only mumble. My eyes were also sealed tightly. No, let me go. I mumbled. That person said, stay here and do your duty. Then he slammed the door shut. Day after day passed, I became weaker and weaker, I couldn't see anything, my hands and feet were tied, I could only walk. There were crazy times when I ran around the room scratching to find a way out. What have I done to sin? Hungry? Thirsty? I'm getting weaker. With my last breath, I touched my chest and pulled out the crude flute. If only I could play a little melody for my teammates to come save me. If only. Ben let go and the flute fell to the ground. His head bowed, his last breath flew away as lightly as a breeze. The magician quietly walked up to the hidden basement, followed by Mr. Dang. What must be done to solve the mystery before someone discovers the cellar? Everyone put a bamboo stake down to mark the location of the cellar door and then covered it back with soil. Everyone goes home. Toan, his cousin, and Lone followed the teacher back to his old house. Everyone sat in the living room. The teacher took another puff of his pipe cigarette and said, "This soul has been imprisoned here for too long, but now it has met the right person so it can be taken away. Surely your little girl must have done something to make her pay attention. This technique is complicated in that, to save one person's soul, another person's soul must be replaced to continue to act as the guardian. Otherwise, all souls will be trapped here, no one will be able to escape." Mr. Dang held his head. What should I do now? To change the guardian of the property, you must ask permission from the family that established the contract. Please go and contact him yourself. The next day, the teacher performed the cleaning ceremony. Place 4 stakes at the 4 corners of the land and then string red threads around those 4 stakes. He also stuck 4 talismans on the 4 sides and then gave a candle to Lone, telling her to sit in the middle and keep the candle burning, day and night. When it ran out, she had to immediately replace it with a new one. Candles are fire, symbolizing yang. Only yang can be used to suppress yin. Mr. Dang went to the city committee to ask for information from the landowner. Fortunately, that person's family address is right in the city. That afternoon, Mr. Dang immediately followed the address written on the piece of paper. The owner of the house is a woman nearly 40 years old and her family. She said that the land was passed down from her family, and she was also told to take care of that land. Because she is a daughter, she has to worry about more things from her husband's family. She does not have time to care about the land, which is only used to grow tea to buy and sell according to the season, and let a friend manage it for her. Her father has passed away, she is an only child, and her paternal side of the family is now all women. In recent generations, her father's family has only had daughters. Her uncles, even her father, also passed away early. Her family is considered to have no male descendants. Her paternal uncles also used to flirt around the world, hoping to find a son but could not. After listening to Mr. Dang's story, she was extremely surprised because there was such a terrible secret under her house. At Mr. Dang's request, she agreed to stop by to see the magician. They moved immediately. The people at home dug a round hole leading down to the cellar door. The landowner refused to go down to see the body, she just wanted to meet the magician to solve everything quickly. As soon as she met the landowner, the magician waved his hand. "No, that's not possible. The person who decides this matter must be a man. But my family only has women, I'm an only child, my father is the eldest, and my father's brothers don't have any sons, there are only 2 girls. Think carefully about whether there are any boys in your father's family. Wait a minute. It seems my aunt's daughter has a son about 5 years old. That's fine, bring the boy here. What are you going to do to him? He's only 5 years old, so he doesn't know anything. I have to ask the boy's mother. A little fresh blood to end this matter. Isn't it too cheap to wash away your family's sins? Do you know why your family is not lacking in wealth but unhappy? Her family will never have another son again. Sickness, damage, will grow in each generation of your family, because of the crimes your ancestors left behind. She trembled, then turned away, mumbling, I will come back later. That night, everyone took turns holding the candles. Everyone is exhausted. Toan took over for his cousin at 2 a.m., each person watched for an hour. I just hope this ends quickly, everyone is exhausted. If the boy can't be brought here, this pest control charm won't last long. Toan sat in his position, alone on the top of the hill in a quiet space. Toan also felt scared but did not dare to say anything. Is it because I'm a man that I don't dare to face these things? Placing the candle on the prepared tarpaulin floor, Toan rubbed his hands together, surrounded by new candles. When the old candle is almost exhausted, it must be lit and replaced immediately. Only one candle can be burned, no more. Toan sleeps. I dozed off, still holding the candlestick in my hand. A very light sound passed by. A familiar melody is the sound of a flute. When Toan suddenly woke up, the sound of the flute stopped. Or dream. Toan suddenly realized that the candle in his hand had long since gone out. Toan frantically searched for matches in his pocket to light it. I struck the match several times without burning. Toan's hands were all sweaty. Rumble. The sound of the locked underground door rang loudly as if someone was knocking hard to get out. Swoosh, squeak, squeak, the sound of nails scratching on the cellar door continuously sounded hair-raising. Toan stood up in fear, dropped the matchbox he was holding, and planned to run away from where he was sitting. Toan staggered down the hill when suddenly something grabbed Toan's ankle, causing him to fall down. Turning his head to look back, Toan saw a small hand holding his ankle tightly. From the wet ground, the head emerged with a very familiar face to Toan, Baby Bong, with his mouth open and full of dirt. From the girl's eyes fell out a bunch of maggots. "Brother, please play with me." Toan screamed loudly, then used all his strength to break out his legs and run straight down the hill, looking towards the light in the house as if looking for a way out. While running, Toan bumped into something. Looking up, Toan realized the rotting corpse of Uncle Dung standing there. Toan had no more strength left, but the house was only a few meters away. Toan used all his strength to run through the gate, then fell into the yard. Loud noises rang out in the house. Koan, the sound of porcelain shattering. Toan quickly ran inside. Everyone is huddled on the floor. Lying on the floor was Mr. Dang, his eyes rolled back, his body convulsing, bent like a boiled shrimp. The magician is trying his best to use one hand to press on Mr. Dang's chest, with the other hand holding two fingers pointing up between Mr. Dang's eyebrows. The teacher shouted, "Bring the baby back here, quickly." Stroke of unknown cause, "I'm afraid I'll lose another life this night." Was it because? Toan knocked over the candle. Toan thought in shock, a feeling of guilt rising. Lone pulled Toan's hand and ran out the door. Toan frantically parked the motorbike and took Lone away. Looking in the rearview mirror, Toan saw Bong and his mother standing in the distance, watching. Toan shivered. The night dew is very cold. Lone kept urging him to go quickly. Once there, Toan knocked on the door of the massive house in a hurry. It wasn't until a while later that there was the sound of sandals squeaking down along with a grumble, "Who's coming at this hour?" Toan quickly said as the iron door opened, "I beg you, please save my uncle, please bring him back. Come over there, little boy." "Are you? I'm your nephew who came to see you the other day. Everything is in serious danger, I hope you can help." Looking at the two people's pleading eyes, she hesitated, then put on her coat and led the motorbike out. The three of them walked together in the dark to the house of the landowner's cousin. "Fortunately, today is the weekend. My daughter's sister let her grandchild go home to play, otherwise the daughter's husband's family would have to be involved." She rang the doorbell, and a moment later her daughter-in-law opened it. Auntie, hello aunt. Why are you here so late? It's almost morning, what else, the clock is now past 3 o'clock. The landowner hesitated, "Can I borrow your boy? There are some things that are difficult to talk about." "What's wrong?" "She's sleeping." The landowner shyly pulled her niece-in-law inside and whispered. Lone and Toan stood outside, waiting impatiently. "There are 2 more hours until dawn." The voice of the niece-in-law rang out, "No. I don't want the boy to have anything to do with those trivial matters." Lone ran in to continue, "I don't want to interfere, but it's really an emergency. I beg you. Please help my family." Toan also quickly continued, "My family has lost 2 lives, please. We will bring the baby home safely. Carefully. I can't feel secure in handing the boy over to you guys. Let me and his father take him with us." Hearing that, Lone and Toan quickly thanked him profusely. After that, the sleepy boy was carried by his mother into his father's car, heading towards Mr. Dang's house. Lone, Toan, and the landowner followed closely behind. Far away on the horizon, light flashed. "Hurry up, time is running out." When everyone arrived at Mr. Dang's house, no one was in the house. Lone and Toan went to the back garden and led them up the hill. The baby's parents were very upset and the baby kept crying. The sound of children screaming in the middle of the night echoed throughout the hillside. The teacher built an outdoor altar. The ceremony was simple but nothing was missing. They were able to prepare a large catfish in a basin of water. Toan also doesn't understand why the expulsions and exchanges require fish. The teacher pulled out a set of long needles with handles of many strange shapes. He also wore a red jacket with glitter studded over his usual bright brown shirt, like the clothes of ancient Taoists. 2 large black candles were lit. The altar was set up next to the tunnel door, inside the red threads. When did the middle-aged woman they met on Cao Bang arrive? She carried a sealed box that looked like a guitar case. She said to the teacher, "I can borrow it?" Then open the box. Inside there is a small sword with a large handle with a bell attached, looking a bit old. The teacher lifted the sword, which seemed quite heavy, then danced around. A relative of Mr. Dang brought back a large iron bar, a blowtorch, and a hammer. Another person brought home votive items. It was admirable that they were able to find all the necessary things so late at night. The final ceremony began in silence. Everyone knelt around the ceremony area, praying sincerely. The teacher said, "Lone, go down to the basement and turn on the phone." There was a bit of panic in Lone's eyes, but she still held her bag tightly to her waist and determinedly went down to the basement. Toan saw that and chased after him. "Let me go with you." Then, without letting Lone say anything more, Toan grabbed a candle and a lighter and went down to the cellar. The cellar is dark and musty. Toan and Lone approached the body, ready to wait for the phone call. On the top of the hill, the master danced the first sword strokes. The talismans were pulled out and heated in the candle light. A series of thoughts escaped from the teacher's mouth. In the basement, Toan felt his ears ringing because the space was full of stuffiness. Suddenly, Toan suddenly heard the sound of a flute, becoming clearer and penetrating deep into Toan's ears. He sat down and held his head. Lone asked worriedly, but he didn't hear anything. "Lone, remove the chains from the corpse." The teacher's voice rang out on the phone. Lone tremblingly approached the silent corpse, used the pliers in her bag to cut off the rusted lock. The sound of the chain falling off went kerrang! Snap! The corpse's hand grabbed Lone's hand tightly, startling her and causing her to drop the candlestick. The basement was plunged into darkness. Lone shouted. On the altar, the teacher was still performing crazy sword dances in the flickering candlelight. He is performing a ceremony asking heaven and earth for permission to save the soul down there. The corpse emitted groans and screams that sounded like that of a mute person, unable to speak. The corpse's head rotated. Lone turned pale in fear and tried to get out and ran into the darkness. She tripped over something and fell to the ground. When she turned around, the corpse pressed its head into her ear, grabbed her hand tightly, and let out a long scream. Lone stiffened and then cried out, "Toan, Toan." Toan was in a delirium when he heard Lone's echo when he suddenly woke up, following the horrifying scream in the darkness. Toan flipped the body back so hard that it fell over, the bones cracking. "Lone, what's wrong? Remove its charm." Lone used her hand to yank off the talisman stuck on the corpse's blindfold. It was still moaning, then from the 2 eye sockets hidden behind the cloth, red tears ran down its rotten face. "It is crying." "Lone, listen." "Remove the blindfold from its eyes and mouth at the same time." "But I can't open my eyes." "Certain." After speaking, The teacher turned off the phone. Toan heard, along with Lone, one person held the blindfold, the other held the mouth tape. Closing their eyes, they unfastened the tight knot. Old sheets of cloth fell down. A terribly cold wind blew up in the cellar. The surrounding furniture was broken and scattered. That wind rushed straight up the surface of the tunnel. A man standing near the hatch collapsed to his knees. The teacher shouted, "Help him in here quickly." Two other men dragged his limp body into the altar area and quickly left. He shook and cried a lot. "Tongue, I have a tongue. That guy. Why did you kill that mother and child?" the teacher growled. The man mumbled in tears, I'm lonely. Just moved into the new house a week ago, little Bong still hasn't made any new friends in the neighborhood. She still often goes to the garden to grow vegetables and make cakes alone. Her parents are busy with their own work. Bong is still used to being alone. Late in the afternoon, in the dark, Bong suddenly heard beautiful music echoing from afar. The little girl curiously followed the music. It came from the tea tree groves of the nearby hill. The girl climbed the trail leading to the top of the hill. The girl happily jumped up and down. When she got there, she saw a soldier sitting and playing the flute. "Ah! This is the soldier on TV." Bong happily ran closer to him. From then on, a few days later, Bong came up to play with him again. I don't know where his house is, but he seems very sad. I'm alone just like Bong. No matter what Bong asked, he didn't say anything. Only for cotton candy. The girl ate well. That night, Bong was scolded by his mother. The girl was so upset that she sobbed and ran to the garden. Bong climbed up a familiar hill. Seeing Bong crying and his hands covered in purple marks, the soldier seemed very angry. He fed Bong a lot of cake, and Bong couldn't finish chewing it. Then he made Bong go to sleep. Before going to bed, he even combed Bong's hair. The little girl lay down and stared at the starry sky. You are lonely, and do you have the right to take away her life, turn it into a wandering soul like you? Not only that, you also took away her mother. No. No. The man said in a harsh voice. The child was beaten, I took him away. I was forced. Who forced it? The man cried bitterly. Avalakai Tesvara, underworld. The teacher held his head. If she were an underworld official, Ms. Dung's ghost would be tortured until one more person was captured. The teacher performed the spell again, asking for the insect to be removed, and begging for alms from Guan Yin. He pulled out a thread, stretched it, and used his sword to cut it. He asked the middle-aged woman to burn votive paper to worship Quan Am. Now is the time to free all three of these souls. I'll try to ask the land to see if this dragon vein doesn't have a dead town. I'm afraid it'll be difficult, otherwise, I'll have to find a replacement guardian god. Saying that, he danced his sword in the air again. In the east, the sun begins to rise. Pick the baby up here. The teacher called. The child's father trembled after witnessing what had just happened. The boy, who was still sleepy, went up to the teacher. Give me your hand, kid. What are you going to do? Without saying a word, the teacher opened the boy's hand, used the tip of the sword to make a cut to let blood flow out. The boy cried loudly. What are you doing? The father was angry. The teacher used a golden talisman to catch the boy's blood and continued to dance. The angry father was about to rush at the teacher, but everyone around had time to drag him down. The teacher stuffed the bloody talisman deep into the catfish's mouth. Then the teacher swung his sword around, skewered another talisman and stabbed straight into the upper abdomen of the man who was crying and groaning on the ground. He vomited and lay on the ground. At this time, the catfish began to thrash around. Very quickly, the teacher pulled out the needles displayed on the table and inserted them all over the catfish's body. The teacher began tossing hexagrams, asking the land for permission to take away this reluctant earth guardian. Tossed 3 times, all showed bad hexagrams. Suddenly, the ground began to crack in long lines. This is not good. I do not agree that there is no one to guard this land, so if there is no one to replace it, this matter will never end. Dragon veins in this terrain will also be affected, no longer fertile, everything will wither. Their family only uses someone to keep the family's wealth, but they accidentally enchant the land at the right dragon vein. Now, I really don't know what to do anymore. The first rays of sunlight began to shine down. Mr. Dang's life was measured in minutes. If there is no replacement, these 3 souls will forever be lost, and Toan's family will still be threatened. Other Toan relatives began to cry out in anger. Arrest these people themselves. It was their family who spread the crime, they must pay the price. The 4 people of that family began to tremble in fear. Some people grabbed the aunt and niece's arms and tried to drag them away. Stop it! The teacher shouted. They have no sin at all. It's all due to the mistakes their ancestors made, karma. At this time, Toan and Lone were helping each other out of the dark cellar, leaving behind the motionless body in the cellar. As he walked up, Toan suddenly saw Mrs. Dung holding Bong's hand in silence, standing right outside the red thread. They no longer looked as scary as before. They were all trembling. Let her go, the ghost whispered. What? Toan stammered. Uncle, stay, let her go. Toan suddenly understood. Toan approached the teacher and asked, Teacher, does the replacement must be someone who is still alive? The teacher replied, Why, no need. Just 1 soul here to guard the land. I have cancelled the spell to imprison the guardian. Uncle Dung will stay. The teacher was startled. Really, if you stay, your soul will be trapped here forever, protecting this vein. I can't escape forever, really, I don't want anyone to stay here. Toan looked towards Uncle Dung's ghost. She nodded slightly. If someone stays, will the others be saved? Toan continued asking. Sure. The teacher affirmed. Saving people is more important. Someone needs to sacrifice for it all to end. Hurry up, time is running out. Toan is steadfast. The teacher hesitated for a moment. It seemed like the rising sunlight urged him more and more. It seemed like the best way. Is there anything left of her? The teacher asked. Only her urn left in the house. Uncle Dang planned to take it to the temple, but he was afraid he would be like the little girl. A relative replied, Bring the ash urn up here. Hurry up. The teacher urged. A man quickly ran down the hill to the house. 5 minutes later, he ran up, holding a white porcelain vase with a red lid. The teacher raised his sword again, then took the talisman from the piece of catfish and put it in the vase. Then, he took the red threads, wrapped many times around the jar and tied it tightly. The teacher asked everyone to bring down the white jar and at the same time bring up the body from the basement. They had prepared the canvas. 4 men climbed down one by one. They put the jar in the small old room and struggled to lift the body. The clock showed nearly 5 a.m. Okay. The teacher said. Now it's time to perform the ceremony to protect the dragon veins. He lit 3 large incense sticks with 2 pairs of chopsticks, inserted them into the incense bowl and then waved his sword to the ringing sound of bells. The men scooped up dirt and covered it. The tunnel door according to the teacher's instructions. Layer after layer of soil poured down, covering up the horrifying secrets of wartime. Everything happened quickly and urgently. The teacher took out the long, sharp iron bar he had prepared in advance. Then he skewered a hard red talisman through it. "Get the welding machine over here." Everyone follows suit. "Now, heat the iron one hand at a time. When the iron becomes red hot, it begins to close." Just like that. Everyone placed the iron bar in the middle of the newly filled hole. One person heated the iron bar red. 2 people used hammers to hammer it down tightly. Just like that, until the iron bar only protrudes a little. "Okay." The teacher breathed a sigh of relief. The dragon vein and the basement have been enchanted. Now anyone who encroaches on this place will be chased away. What about my family's wealth?" the landowner shouted. "You greedy thing." The teacher said, "Your family's property, if it is not with the consent of the Lord, you will not be able to take it. Don't dream about anything. From now on, no one will bless your family's career path or reputation anymore. Be self-reliant and suffer the karma left by your ancestors." The landowner turned away and, along with her niece's family, slowly walked down the hill. The first light of day became increasingly brighter. Far away there was the bustling noise of the early market. Everything seems happier than the nightmares that have lasted for the past few days. Everyone started cleaning everything up. "We need to know where this person's hometown is so we can take him back. My family must have been waiting for many years," one of Toan's cousins said as he looked at the body. Toan looked towards the bright pink sunlight peeking over the horizon. In the distance, there were the silhouettes of 2 people, one large, one small. The teacher also looked in that direction. That was the soul of the soldier imprisoned for 50 years underground. His hand was leading a small, familiar, and fresh soul, little girl Bong with a grinning face. Toan saw them clearly for the first time. Not in the look of being lost and terrified in the world, but in such a peaceful appearance. The soldier with neat clothes, dark face with determined, youthful features but still mixed with wind and weather. He bowed his head, "Thank you, and sorry." The teacher spoke, "Where do you want to go?" "Name, hometown." The soldier replied, his voice as distant as the sound of the wind, "I want to lie with my teammates, Huang the Ben, Squad 3, Military Region E91. "Okay, take the girl, go to a safe place, I will help you." The teacher said, just loud enough for Toan to hear. "One more thing, can I have my flute?" The ghost gradually faded. The teacher approached the body, opened the canvas and picked up a crudely carved flute, somewhat rotten from lying on the ground for too long. Wiping the flute, the teacher placed it on his lips and played a tune. The sound of the flute is no longer clear, but everyone recognizes the melody. The eulogy soldier's soul sounded mournfully in the space, like a farewell to a soldier. The ghost smiled. The teacher took out a lighter from his pocket and burned the flute. The fire caught very quickly and burned the flute. Little Bong raised his hand to say goodbye. They turned away and disappeared in the dawn light. When Toan got home, Mr. Dang had woken up and was lying in bed. The teacher told him everything that happened last night. Mr. Dang thanked him profusely. Thanks to the teacher, Ben and his son still have each other. Hearing the part where his wife's soul was imprisoned forever underground, Mr. Dang hugged his face and sobbed. A mother was willing to sacrifice so that her child could see the sun. From now on, Mrs. Dung will never receive all the offerings. Her soul lies here forever, 1,000 years without end. The teacher advised Mr. Dang to perform the alms ceremony for Guanyin within the next 50 days. Every day must be full of thanksgiving, without missing anything. In the afternoon, he and the middle-aged woman packed their things and left early. Lone also followed. Lone said goodbye to everyone quietly. They went a long way together, overcoming the most terrible days. In the days that followed, Toan completed his unfinished work. Mr. Dang relied on acquaintances in the army to find the martyrs' cemetery of soldiers who fought and died in 1948 in the land of Viet Bac at that time. Only a few graves were found and buried in the local martyrs' cemetery, but most of the soldiers had sacrificed their lives but still could not find their graves. Mr. Dang asked the police to find the remaining families left by Soldier Ben. They have been looking for their grandfather's grave for many years but have not found it, so they have given up a long time ago. Upon receiving the news, the family was extremely happy. Mr. Dang worked together with Mr. Ben's family to bring his body to that martyr's cemetery to bury it in accordance with his last wish. The reburial ceremony was large and emotional. Now, Mr. Ben can return to his teammates after many years of waiting. Toan's life gradually returns to its old rhythm. Toan has found a new, very good room, and will go back to school next semester. Toan went to Ondo's parents' house along the Kor River to tell them the truth. They have been looking forward to finding their daughter's body for many years. That is also their motivation to live every day. Now, knowing that their daughter was a murderer, and now betrayed by the wormwood tree, they learned that Ondo's body had forever disintegrated under that fast-flowing river. The street vendor's grandparents were very depressed. However, they still have the right to know the truth, so they can live the rest of their lives in peace. The couple decided to sell the house here and move to another place to live. Only by throwing away the old things will they have the courage to start anew at the age of 70 years old. Toan promised to try to keep in touch and visit his grandparents regularly. After everything, Toan feels more mature and can cope with all difficulties, no longer the young boy he once was. After the things Toan had witnessed over the past few months, he was still in a daze, waking up with his back drenched in sweat. However, when he opened his eyes, he realized that everything was really over. At that time, Toan was left with only a feeling of relief. One day, Toan received a text message from Lone. She learned a lot after living with the magician. She invited Toan to attend her eye-opening ceremony this weekend. Toan happily accepted the invitation. Toan set foot on Cao Bang land after many days. Lone's eye-opening ceremony is extremely simple. Only Toan, the magician, the middle-aged woman and the instrumentalists witnessed it. Lone wore bright brown clothes, a white ceremonial robe, and a white scarf on her head like the bronze bars often wear when serving copper. On the altar in the straw house, all kinds of offerings are displayed, leaving nothing behind. Lone walks across hot coals spread on the floor, expressing her devotion and the removal of worldly things in the world. The teacher bowed his head and asked them to return to the chair and continue to help the Buddha to help sentient beings. Then he took red powder and applied it to Lone's forehead and closed eyes. The teacher tossed a coin to ask for their hexagrams, all of which were good. Lone held 2 burning candles, danced, and sang a dong song to the sound of trumpets and percussion. After finishing the exercise, Lone opened her eyes and bent the dumbbells 3 times on the floor. She personally offered thanks and brought out the goods. So from now on, Lone has become a bronze student, continuing what her teacher left unfinished. Toan is very happy for Lone. She is an honest and brave girl who will definitely do many things beyond her teacher. Toan stayed and had a simple meal with them and then asked permission to go home. Toan suddenly felt extremely homesick. Witnessing many scenes of separation made Toan feel more appreciative of his family. Before returning home for a month, Toan went to burn incense for baby Bong and then met Mr. Dio to say goodbye. Mr. Dio still looked the same, a bit happier. The two brothers talked for a long time over a hot pot and a cup of wine. The two brothers opened their hearts more. Mr. Dio told Toan all the things deep in his heart that had tormented him for so long. "I'm about to go on a business trip." "Quite a long time," Mr. Dio said. "You just go back to Hanoi and then come up here, we'll meet again and talk again." Mr. Dio smiled. Toan reached out and held Mr. Dio's hand tightly, shaking it. "Sure. Go well and be strong. Thank you for everything." Mr. Dio and Toan pulled back their hands and nudged each other's shoulders intimately. "All right? Promise." And with that, the two of us said goodbye to each other. In 2 days, Toan will take the bus back to Hanoi. However, that will be the last complete meeting between the two brothers. When he was a child, Dio lived with his parents and younger brother in a small house with a garden. At that time, there were still many gardens. The children in the neighborhood were very close to each other. They often invited each other to go out, steal fruits from the garden or invite each other to play marbles in the courtyard of the cultural house. Dio's younger brother is 6 years younger than Dio. The boy was very attached to his brother. His parents were busy working, and the boy was not old enough to go to school, so the adults just left him at home for his brother to look after. When Dio went to school, he temporarily sent the boy to a neighbor's house. That summer, having spent 2 months at home on vacation, the boys in the neighborhood went out all day, each of them completely black. DM is equally as playful. He enthusiastically went out with his friends, climbed trees, fought mock battles, and competed in swimming in the water near his house. Work. The most annoying thing is that my younger brother follows me around all day like a tail. On normal days, Dio also loves his younger brother very much. He is very talkative and gives him anything delicious. He has to wait for him to come home from school before eating. But that was the story of the past. Now, Dio has to play and look after his younger sister, getting entangled and frustrated. He loves to imitate what Thing does. Thing can't keep it that close forever. That afternoon, after picking fruit in Mr. Tam's garden, the boys went down to the river to cool off. Dio ran with the boys to the riverbank, not paying attention to his younger brother running behind him. "Brother Dio. Wait for me, Mr. Dio." Arriving at the riverbank, the boys stripped off their shirts, intending to jump into the river wearing only shorts. He was taking off his shoes and preparing to jump down when his younger brother caught up. It clung to Dio's pants. "Brother, let me play with you." The angry thing with the boy, "I can't play with you. Wait for me here, I'll pick you up in a minute, okay?" Saying that, Dio jumped into the river, leaving the boy on the bank. The boys competed to swim a long distance, then threw water at the slowest swimmer. "Hey guys, go to the other side of the river to pick reeds and break trees to fight. Whoever comes first will be the general," one guy shouted. The whole group raced to swim to the other side of the river, climbing up to the shore, each one soaking wet, jumping into an imaginary battle. At the end of the afternoon, Dio and his friends went around the next village to return to his neighborhood. Entering the gate of the house, Dio happily whistled. Mother Dio ran out. "Dio, why is this so mundane? How much clothes should I buy for you? So where is Dad?" At this moment, Article suddenly remembered that he forgot to pick her up. Dio rushed to the riverbank, grabbed his shirt and shoes that were still lying on the riverbank, but there was absolutely no sign of the boy. "Dad? Let's go home." "Dad, I'm here." The only response to Article's words was the sound of trees rustling in the gradually descending darkness. Inside, Theo was in an extremely chaotic mood, both worried and afraid that his parents would scold him for not taking good care of his younger sibling. He ran to the nearby neighbor's house. Who knows, maybe the boy waited too long and ran to the neighbor's house to play. However, the boy was not there, no one saw him. That night, the whole neighborhood turned on the lights to look for the 6-year-old boy. Theo's father was so angry, even if he looked at me, he couldn't do it. In the days that followed, there was still no sign of the boy. Those days, Article lived in severe torment. "I can't eat or sleep until my younger brother comes home." On the 10th day, Theo's younger brother returned. But it came back in a way no one expected. A fishing family recovered the boy's body nearly 8 kilometers downstream of their home. Theo's mother fainted, and Theo's father was silent and his eyes were cloudy. The feeling of guilt invaded him, making him not brave enough to face everyone. He locked himself in his room and cried helplessly. That afternoon, little Dad waited forever for him, but he never came back to pick him up. A moment later, the boy looked to the other side. In the distance he saw the silhouettes of several boys climbing onto the shore. "Ah! It's Mr. Dio, where are you going, brother Dio?" "Brother," the boy called, but of course his brother did not hear. He was about to disappear behind the trees. The boy quickly rushed into the river and ran reflexively. A year later, Theo asked for permission to transfer to a boarding school in the city. He could not bear the mourning that covered the house that was once his home. Theo's mother was depressed, and his father rarely said another word to him. From that day on, Theo tried to avoid going home as much as possible. He tried to stay in the city. Theo's parents still sent money regularly, but there was absolutely no inquiry or phone call. The bond between them now has only 2 words: responsibility. Growing up, Theo studied on his own to pass the university entrance exam. He also tried to do many good things to somehow ease the pain that still ached in his heart. After graduating, Theo chose a career that required traveling, or being very busy. He closed himself off. On the outside he was very happy and cheerful, but no one knew how torn inside he was over the years. It's been a long time since Theo came home to visit. When meeting Toan, Theo felt that Toan had the appearance of a poor younger brother. Toan was still very young, alone, and encountered an incredible challenge that not everyone could overcome. So naturally, Article truly wanted to help the young man. On the day of Toan's farewell, Theo told the whole story of his life. Toan just listened silently without making any judgments, quietly patting his shoulder. That made him extremely grateful. Mr. Theo is preparing to go on a business trip. He led tours in some western provinces. The night before, he tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. Should I go home to visit? He hasn't lit any incense sticks for his younger brother in many years. On the anniversary of the boy's death every year, he still burns things for him regularly. Is it angry with you? Have your parents forgiven you? Yet these endless thoughts kept him from sleeping. Waking up in the morning, Theo overslept. He frantically grabbed his travel bag, put on temporary clothes and rushed out of the house without even having time to shave. When he got to the bus station in Hanoi, the bus he was about to get on had run away. He was confused. Early tomorrow morning I have to lead the group. If you don't go now, how will you get there on time? Where are you going? A man saw his appearance and asked. I went to the western provinces, but now there's no more cars. Luckily, my company still has a trip through Ho Chi Minh City to Kendo this afternoon. The sleeper bus is a real one. Are you going get down there and catch the next bus? Okay, lucky. Happy thing. The man led Mr. Dew outside the bus station and saw a car with its engine running loudly, preparing to depart. On the bus it says Hanoi, Kindo. Hurry up, the bus is about to leave, we still have to pick up passengers in the provinces. Luckily for you, the queue beds are all reserved, there's only one bed left. The man from earlier urged. Dew carried his light luggage into the car and climbed in to sit on his second floor bed. The car started moving onto the highway. The car ride was silent the entire time. Mr. Dew looked down at the car with bored eyes. The bus was at the first stop, so there were only a few people. A girl wearing headphones is lying down, gently swaying her head to the music, scrolling through her iPhone screen. Above is a disheveled-looking woman, wearing a cloth hat and sleeping soundly. On the left is a mother and her daughter chatting quietly. Slowly now. Mr. Dew started counting. First. 2, 3. 4, 5. 6, 7. There were 7 women in the car in total. The medium's words echoed in his ears, if one day, you are forced to get on a bus and there are only 7 women on the bus, you must get off immediately. Definitely, 7 different places and 7 killings, 7 people, 7 pain, remember. Mr. Dew panicked and started sweating. Should we believe her words? The car was still moving steadily on the highway. Mr. Dew climbed down and said loudly, "Driver, can I get off the bus? I suddenly remembered, I left important documents at home." The driver's voice rang out, "You're on the highway, you can't get off." All the women in the car stared at Article with strange, lifeless eyes. They didn't say a single word. Mr. Dew trembled. "Let me down. Let me down. You can't get down." The driver's voice was even. Mr. Dew started to panic. He ran to the back door and banged hard to put pressure on the driver. The car finally stopped. "Open door." Mr. Dew rushed down, holding a travel bag in his hand. His legs trembled as he sat close to the edge of the highway. After making an emergency stop, the car quickly moved away. Looking across the street, he saw a familiar figure. The boy approached him. "I'm still waiting for you here. Shall we go together?" Mr. Dew smiled. Then he sobbed, I'm sorry, forgive me." The boy patted his head, "It's okay, I'm not angry with you. Will you take me there?" Mr. Dew nodded and led the boy's hand toward the sun. The newspaper reported that a tragic car accident occurred on the highway leading to Highway 1. According to the initial investigation, the wheel exploded, causing the driver to crash the car into the median at high speed. The number of casualties is 9 people. One victim left his position during the collision, so when the incident happened, his body was thrown out of the car. The police verified his identity as Mr. D. Hometown. Thank you to everyone who have supported the work all the past time. We will try to have new works in the shortest time.
Thank you for taking the time to watch Ghost Stories video. Hopefully the content has brought you interesting and meaningful moments. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the Ghost Stories YouTube channel to follow the channel's next videos. See you in the next video. Have a good day.